Get the two kids into the car right now. Don't say a word to your son." The floor repairman whispered those words in my bedroom on a cold October morning. I stared at him like he had lost his mind. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer. He only handed me his phone. The photos on the screen made my blood run cold. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. But deep down, I knew someone in this house had wanted me gone for a long time. Welcome back to Revenge Dad. Before we begin, I'd love for you to drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to question someone you thought you knew completely? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs today. Please note, some details have been adapted for storytelling purposes, but the message at the heart of this is what truly matters. The headache arrived at 6:30 a.m., sharp just like it had every morning for the past 8 months. A dull throb behind my temples that I blamed on age, on grief, on the adjustment to living under someone else's roof. I never suspected it was evident, systematic, deliberate proof that my own son was trying to kill me. But that morning, October 3rd, 2022, I didn't know any of that yet. I reached for the aspirin bottle on the nightstand, my 68-year-old joints protesting, as I sat up in the renovated bedroom. 2 white tablets, a gulp of water from the glass I kept beside Constance's photograph. My late wife's face smiled at me from the silver frame, frozen at 64, 18 months gone, but still the first person I spoke to every morning. "Morning, Martha," I whispered, using the nickname only I had ever called her. "Another headache today. Getting old ain't for sissies, just like you always said." The photograph didn't answer. It never did. But talking to her had become as automatic as breathing, a habit I'd carried with me when I moved in with our son after the funeral. Dwight, 41, and carrying the weight of financial failure in every forced smile, had insisted I shouldn't live alone. Family meant safety, he'd said. I pushed myself out of bed, my bare feet meeting the warm hardwood floor. That was odd. The room felt warmer than usual, almost humid. Dwight had mentioned the new insulation would help with winter heating costs, but October in Cincinnati shouldn't feel this close. I padded to the window and looked out at the backyard. Dwight stood near the fence line, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing sharply. Even from the second floor, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his voice carried that low, urgent tone that meant money problems, work, stress, adult burdens. I'd hoped my electrician's pension might help ease. Then he glanced up and saw me watching. The transformation was instant, the anxiety smoothed from his face like someone had flipped a switch. He raised his hand in an enthusiastic wave, his mouth forming an exaggerated smile. I waved back, and he pointed toward the house, then mimed eating. Always thoughtful, always caring. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Dwight sent 20 minutes earlier. "Did you sleep well, Dad? I left chicken porridge on the kitchen counter for you." The warmth of it should have comforted me. Instead, something small and cold settled in my stomach. An electrician's instinct, the same one that had kept me alive through 40 years of working with live circuits. Something in this circuit didn't quite add up. I shook it off. Grief made you paranoid. Grief made you see shadows where there was only love. For 18 months since Constance died, I'd been telling myself that moving in with Dwight was the right choice. That family meant safety. That the headaches were just age, the strange warmth in my room, just better insulation, the tightness in my chest, just the normal ache of a man learning to live without his wife of 43 years. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled like ginger and chicken broth. Dwight had already left for work. He always left early, he said, to beat the traffic. The porridge sat in a covered bowl on the counter, still warm. I ladled some into a smaller dish and sat at the kitchen table, the ceramic spoon clicking against the bowl in the quiet house. That's when 9-year-old Wren appeared in the doorway, her bright auburn hair, Constance's hair passed down through generations tangled from sleep. She wore pajamas covered in cartoon astronauts and carried her stuffed rabbit under one arm. "Morning, Grandpa," she said, climbing into the chair across from me. "Can I have Lucky Charms? Only if you promise to eat some real food first." I said, the same negotiation we'd had every morning. "How about some toast? Deal." She grinned, and I got up to put bread in the toaster. When I set the plate in front of her a few minutes later, butter melting into whole wheat, just the way she liked it, she took a bite and then asked with the casual innocence that only children possess, "Grandpa, why does Daddy always go into your room when you're asleep?" My hand froze halfway to my coffee mug. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I kept my voice level easy. "Just a curious question from a curious kid." "I've seen him a bunch of times," Wren said, crunching her toast. "When I get up for water at night, Daddy's standing outside your door, or sometimes he's slipping inside real quiet. He always has something little in his hand, like a small box or something. I thought maybe he was checking to make sure you're okay." "Now that's probably it," I heard myself say. "He's probably just checking to make sure Grandpa is okay." But my hand had started trembling against the coffee mug, and I set it down carefully before Wren could notice. She'd already turned her attention back to her toast, the question forgotten as quickly as she'd asked it. Her child's mind moving on to thoughts of school and recess and whether she'd packed her math homework. I couldn't forget. How many times had I ignored that small voice in my head? The electrician's instinct that recognized when something in a circuit didn't quite add up. The warmth in my room. The headaches that arrived with mechanical precision. Dwight's tense phone calls. And now this midnight visits to my bedroom while I slept, carrying something small, something Wren had seen but couldn't identify. I thought about the new insulation Dwight had insisted on installing, the renovation he'd completed before I moved in, the way he always asked about my sleep, my health, whether I'd taken my evening medications. The pattern was there. I'd just been too trusting, too grateful, too desperate to believe my son loved me to see it. I set my coffee mug down carefully, watching my hand tremble against the ceramic. Wren had already turned back to her cereal, the question forgotten. But I couldn't forget. Because 40 years as an electrician had taught me one fundamental truth. When someone checks the same circuit repeatedly in the dark, they're either trying to fix something or making sure it's still working. The floorboards in my bedroom would provide the answer within 24 hours. I spent the rest of that Monday watching my son, observing the way he moved through the house, the way he checked his phone every few minutes, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the ceiling, toward my bedroom, when he thought I wasn't looking. The floorboard gave way beneath my left foot at 7 o'clock Tuesday morning, buckling upward with enough force to send me stumbling forward into the bedpost. I caught myself, my palm smacking against the carved wood, and looked down at the warped plank that had betrayed me. Something was wrong. I knelt my knees protesting the movement and ran my fingers along the buckled wood. In 40 years of electrical work on construction sites, I'd seen every kind of structural failure, water damage that softened boards until they sagged termite rot, that turned solid oak into powder foundation, settling that cracked plaster and shifted door frames. This was none of those things. This board was being pushed upward. I pressed down on it, feeling the resistance. Normal settling pulled things down, made floors sag and doors stick. Water damage made wood swell and crumble. This plank had been forced up from below. The grain compressed the nails straining against their moorings. I tapped it with my knuckles, listening to the hollow resonance that spoke of empty space beneath the subfloor. Something had been installed under my bedroom, something that was creating pressure, something that was generating heat. The warmth I'd felt yesterday morning suddenly made terrible sense. "And Dad, are you okay?" I looked up to find Dwight standing in the doorway, his face frozen in an expression I couldn't quite read. Not concern, not surprise. Something else, something that looked almost like fear. "It's just a loose board," I said, watching his face carefully. "Buckled up overnight. I can fix it myself this afternoon." "No." The word came out too fast, too sharp. Dwight caught himself, smoothed his expression into something that resembled paternal care. "No, Dad. You shouldn't be doing that kind of work at your age. I'll hire a professional contractor to fix this today, right now." That unnatural eagerness in his voice, "I'll fix this today, right now," caught in my chest like a fishhook. Because a boy genuinely worried about his father asks if you're hurt, not whether he can cover the problem up fast enough. "It can wait a few days, son," I said, standing slowly. "Just needs a couple nails and maybe a shim." "No, Dad. Today. I insist." Dwight was already pulling out his phone, his fingers moving across the screen with frantic purpose. "I'll find someone right now, someone who can come this morning." I watched him retreat down the hallway, already absorbed in his phone, and thought about midnight visits with small objects in hand. About 8 months of headaches arriving like clockwork. About renovations completed before I moved in. Insulation installed to help with heating costs in a room that now felt like a greenhouse in October. When someone rushes to cover up a problem, it's because they can't afford to let anyone look at it too long. I moved to the bedroom doorway and watched Dwight settle onto the living room couch, his phone pressed to his ear. He was scrolling through what looked like a Contractor app, selecting the first available morning slot, without reading a single review, without checking credentials, without comparing prices. Last year, when the kitchen tile needed repair, Dwight had spent 3 days researching contractors. He'd called for quotes, checked licenses, read customer testimonials, verified insurance coverage. He'd made a spreadsheet comparing hourly rates and materials costs. It had taken him 72 hours to make a decision about bathroom grout. This morning, he booked a stranger to tear up my bedroom floor in 4 minutes. The phone call came next. Dwight's voice dropped to a near whisper, but the house was old and sound carried through the heating vents in ways he'd apparently forgotten. I stood perfectly still, listening. "It's done," Dwight said, his words tight with tension. "The worker will be here by 10 o'clock this morning, before Dad has a chance to look closer." A pause. A woman's voice on the other end, Celeste, his wife, though I couldn't make out her words. "I know," Dwight said. "I know it's a risk. But if he examines that floor himself, if he pulls up those boards before we can..." Another pause. Longer this time. "Yes," Dwight said finally. "I'll keep him downstairs. I'll make sure he doesn't go back up there until it's handled." He ended the call and sat very still on the couch, his head in his hands, his shoulders rising and falling, with deep breaths that looked more like panic than relief. I backed away from the doorway, silently returning to my bedroom and closing the door with a soft click. My hands were shaking again, not from age, not from grief, but from the cold, crystallizing certainty that my son was hiding something beneath my floor. Something he couldn't afford for me to discover. Something worth hiring a stranger in 4 minutes to conceal before his father's professional expertise could identify it. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about Ren's question, about small objects carried in the dark, about circuits that needed checking, maintaining ensuring they were still working. How many warning signs does a father ignore before he's forced to admit his own son has become a stranger? The answer I was beginning to understand was all of them. Right up until the moment the floor buckles beneath your feet and you can't pretend anymore. I looked at Constance's photograph on the nightstand. "I think our boy is trying to kill me, Martha," I whispered, "and I think he's been working on it for months." The photograph smiled back, offering no comfort, no denial, no reassurance that I was wrong. At exactly 10 o'clock, an old work truck pulled into the driveway. Through the bedroom window, I watched a man step out broad-shouldered mid-50s, maybe moving with a kind of deliberate precision that had nothing to do with carpentry. He scanned the perimeter before approaching the house, his eyes tracking the roofline, the windows, the sight lines from the street. I recognized that gait immediately. 40 years on municipal construction sites taught me the difference between a civilian tradesman and someone who used to wear a uniform. This man had carried a rifle before he'd ever carried a toolbox. The doorbell rang downstairs. Dwight's voice rose in greeting, too bright, too eager. The carpenter who entered my home wasn't just there to fix floorboards. The man who stepped into my bedroom introduced himself as Glenn Garrison, and his handshake was brief, firm, and completely professional. But his eyes weren't looking at me or the damaged floor. They were systematically cataloging every corner of my bedroom like a man clearing hostile territory. "Mr. Prescott," he said, his voice flat and economical. "Glenn Garrison, let's take a look at your problem." He was maybe 52, broad-shouldered with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of weathered hands that spoke of decades holding tools. He set down a worn canvas toolbox near the buckled floorboard, but didn't kneel to examine it. Instead, he moved to the window, first checking the latch scanning the backyard sightlines, then the HVAC vent, then the bed placement, then each corner of the room in methodical sequence. "Aren't you going to look at the floor first?" I asked. "Room first," Glenn said, not looking at me. "Floor second." I'd hired hundreds of contractors in 40 years, plumbers, electricians, drywall specialists, and not one of them had ever checked the ventilation before looking at the actual problem. Glenn pulled on a pair of latex gloves from his pocket, reached up to the HVAC vent cover, and ran one finger along the interior grating. He brought that finger to his nose and held briefly, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and looked at me for the first time with real focus. "How long you been living in this room, Mr. Prescott?" "Year and a half," I said. "Since my wife died." Headaches. The question hit me like a physical blow. "Yes, every morning, for months." Glenn nodded, once his jaw tightening. He didn't explain. He didn't ask follow-up questions. He just turned back to his toolbox and began removing tools with deliberate precision, crowbar, flashlight, work gloves. That's when I noticed Dwight standing in the doorway watching. He'd been there the whole time, silent, observing the contractor's every movement. Glenn must have sensed the presence because he shifted his gaze without turning his head, locking eyes with my son for a single unblinking second. No greeting, no acknowledgement. Just a look that carried weight I couldn't interpret. Dwight stepped back from the doorway and disappeared down the hallway. I heard his footsteps descending the stairs, too fast, too urgent. Glenn knelt beside the buckled floorboard and began working. He didn't rush. Every movement was calculated, efficient, the kind of precision you learned in training that had nothing to do with carpentry. He pried up the first damaged plank, setting it aside carefully, then the second, the third. Standard insulation appeared beneath the surface layer, pink fiberglass batting that looked ordinary, untouched. But Glenn kept digging. He pulled away the insulation, exposing the subfloor joists. Then he produced a tactical flashlight from his belt, military grade, the kind that could double as a weapon, and shone it down into the crawl space between my bedroom floor and the first-story ceiling below. Then all sound cut out. Not gradually, not like someone pausing to think or rest. Just an absolute dead halt. Glenn's breathing stopped. The scraping of tools stopped. Even the ambient noise of the house seemed to vanish, leaving only suffocating silence. I leaned forward, trying to see what he was looking at. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness beneath the floor, illuminating nothing but shadows and the skeletal framework of joists and ductwork. 15 seconds passed. 20. The silence wasn't just absence of sound. It was presence of something worse, recognition, calculation-controlled fear. "Mr. Garrison," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You all right down there?" No answer. The flashlight beam remained perfectly still, aimed at something I couldn't see. Glenn's body had gone rigid, his shoulders locked, his head angled down into the crawl space like a man staring at a live bomb. Silence is louder than any scream when it comes from a man who just looked directly at something he recognized and feared. Another 5 seconds, 10. Then Glenn's voice emerged from the darkness, barely audible, eerily flat. Mr. Prescott. Yes. Do not call your son into this room. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward, reshaping everything I thought I understood about my home, my family, my safety. What did you find? I asked, my throat tightening. Glenn still hadn't moved. The flashlight beam still pointed into the crawl space, unwavering. His voice came out measured, controlled the tone of someone delivering tactical instructions under fire. Do you trust me, Mr. Prescott? I don't even know you. That's not what I asked. I looked down at this stranger, this broad-shouldered man with a military flashlight and latex gloves, who had checked my HVAC vent before examining a broken floor, who had locked eyes with my son and made him retreat without a single word, who now knelt above a darkness I couldn't see and warned me against my own flesh and blood. Yes, I heard myself say, I trust you. Good. Glenn's voice remained flat, empty of emotion. Because what I'm looking at right now requires a very specific kind of response. And calling your son is not part of that response. What is it? Not yet. The flashlight finally moved, sweeping slowly across the crawl space in a methodical grid pattern. First, I need to photograph it, document it, make sure I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing. And what do you think you're seeing? The flashlight clicked off. Glenn remained motionless in the darkness for one more breath, 2 more, 3. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of a man who had seen this kind of thing before and knew exactly what it meant. Something that suggests your son didn't hire me to fix your floor, Mr. Prescott. He hired me to hide it before you could hire someone else. My hands started shaking, not from cold, not from age, from the terrible understanding that the man kneeling beside my bed had just confirmed the suspicion I'd been too afraid to name. How did you know? I whispered. The app your son used to book me, Glenn said, still not emerging from the hole in my floor. It's not a contractor service, it's a veteran network. Combat engineers, EOD specialists, people who know how to identify things civilians shouldn't have to recognize. Your son searched for someone with specific skills. He just didn't realize I'd also know why. He hadn't climbed out yet. He hadn't shown me a single thing. He only told me not to call my own son. And I, a father who had trusted his boy like gospel for 41 years, chose to obey a complete stranger's whispered command from the darkness beneath my bedroom floor. What Glenn Garrison saw in that crawl space would shatter every certainty I had left. When Glenn Garrison finally climbed back up through the gap in my bedroom floor, his face had gone the color of old concrete, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. He set the tactical flashlight down on my dresser with exaggerated care, like a man handling evidence at a crime scene. Then he took a long, slow breath through his nose, his jaw working as if chewing words he couldn't quite bring himself to speak. I waited. 5 seconds, 10. What did you... I started. Glenn stepped close to me. Uncomfortably close. The kind of proximity that violated every civilian social contract, but made perfect sense for tactical communication. He leaned in, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Get your 2 grandkids into my truck right now, he whispered. Don't say a word to anyone. Don't pack a bag. Don't ask questions. Just walk them out. My mouth went dry. What is... Later, his eyes locked onto mine with absolute focus. Right now, just move. No panic. No hesitation. Only the icy absolute certainty of a man who'd looked at lethal danger before and knew exactly how much time you had to react. I'd seen that look once before, 40 years ago, on a site foreman who'd spotted a severed gas line seconds before the spark. He hadn't explained. He'd just screamed run, and we'd run, and the building had collapsed 30 seconds later. Glenn Garrison wasn't screaming, but his eyes were. Where's Dwight? I whispered back. Don't know, don't care. You leave before he comes back upstairs. Glenn's hand settled on my shoulder, firm, but not rough. Trust me, Mr. Prescott. Whatever questions you have, I'll answer them in 10 minutes. But if you want your grandchildren safe, you move right now. I was choosing to trust a stranger I'd met 30 minutes ago over my own son, and somehow looking into Glenn Garrison's unwavering combat-hardened eyes that felt like the first rational decision I'd made in 8 months. I turned and walked out of the bedroom, my legs moving on autopilot, while my brain struggled to process what was happening. The hallway seemed longer than it should have been. The stairs creaked under my weight in a way I'd never noticed before. Every detail of my son's house suddenly felt foreign, hostile, wrong. In the living room, Wren sat on the carpet surrounded by her stuffed animals, staging some elaborate scenario involving a tea party and astronauts. At the dining table, my 14-year-old grandson Kieran bent over his algebra homework pencil, scratching against paper in the quiet afternoon light. They both looked up as I entered. Let's come to the truck with Grandpa, I said, keeping my voice level. Right now. Wren's face scrunched in confusion. Why, Grandpa, I'm playing. Now, sweetheart. Kieran set down his pencil slowly. He studied my face for 3 silent seconds, reading something there I hadn't known I was showing. Then, without a single question, he stood, walked over to his sister, and took her hand. "Come on, Ren," he said quietly. "Grandpa needs us." The boy's trust nearly broke me. He didn't ask why. He didn't argue. He just looked at my face and understood that something had shifted, that the rules of normal Tuesday afternoons no longer applied. At 14, Kieran possessed the same quiet perception his grandmother Constance had carried, the ability to read a room, to sense when questions would waste the time you didn't have. Ren reluctantly stood, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest. "Are we coming back for my toys?" Later, I said, the lie tasting like copper on my tongue. We walked to the front door in complete silence. I could hear Glenn moving in the bedroom above us, methodical sounds of tools being packed, floorboards being replaced, a man cleaning up a crime scene. The hallway clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the house, Dwight's voice drifted up from the basement. He was on another phone call, his tone placating professional. My son's voice. The same voice that had called me dad for 41 years, that had cried when his mother died, that had insisted I move in for my own safety. I opened the front door and guided my grandchildren out into the October sunshine. Glenn's truck sat in the driveway, an old Ford F-150 with Contractor decals and a toolbox mounted in the bed. He emerged from the house 30 seconds behind us, moving with that same deliberate efficiency, his canvas toolbox in one hand, phone in the other. "In the truck," he said softly. "Back seat, both kids. Seatbelts on." Ren and Kieran climbed in without protest. I got into the passenger seat, my hands shaking so badly I could barely buckle the belt. Glenn started the engine, backed out of the driveway with practiced ease, and drove. Not fast, not erratically. Just a normal contractor leaving a normal job site at a normal speed. We turned left at the corner, then right at the next intersection, then left again. 2 blocks from my son's house, Glenn pulled over to the curb and put the truck in park. I turned in my seat to look back the way we'd come. Through the rear window between the oak trees and ranch houses, I could just barely see the brown roof of Dwight's home. The apple tree in the side yard stood exactly where I'd planted it 2 years ago, its branches heavy with late-season fruit. The flower bed Constance and I had designed together still bloomed with her favorite chrysanthemums. That house looked exactly the same as it had this morning, warm, safe, ordinary, like a photograph of a fire that gives no heat. "Grandpa!" Ren's small voice came from the back seat. "When can we go home?" I didn't have an answer. I only knew with the same terrible certainty I'd seen in Glenn Garrison's eyes that we could never spend another night under that roof. Glenn shifted in the driver's seat, his hand still gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. "Mr. Prescott," he said quietly, "I need you to stay very calm when I tell you what I found." In the back seat, Kieran had gone perfectly still, his hand wrapped protectively around his sister's. The boy was listening, understanding more than I wanted him to. Glenn took a breath. "I was Marine Corps combat engineer, Iraq 2004 through 2008, and what's installed beneath your bedroom floor is identical to a chemical vaporization setup I saw used 3 times overseas, twice by insurgents, once by a contractor who got greedy and wanted his partner's share of a reconstruction contract." He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something worse than fear. I saw pity. "Your son isn't just trying to kill you, Mr. Prescott. He's trying to make it look like dementia." The words hung in the air between us. Dementia. Not just murder. Something worse, something designed to make me disappear while I was still breathing. Glenn's voice was flat and cold when he continued, like a soldier delivering after-action intelligence rather than a carpenter explaining home repair. "I was a Marine, 2 tours in Iraq, 2004 through 2008. In 2002, our unit cleared a water poisoning setup in a Kurdish village. Insurgents had rigged digital timers and chemical canisters directly into the primary supply lines. The configuration under your floorboards is identical, not similar, identical." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed completely. "The system vaporizes industrial toxins into your bedroom, HVAC on timed cycles." Glenn continued, his eyes still fixed on the windshield. "Low concentrations during daytime hours, just enough to make you look sluggish and confused to outsiders. Heavy bursts at midnight when you're in deep sleep, accelerating neurological damage. Over months, the cumulative effect mimics progressive dementia symptoms perfectly. Headaches, memory issues, cognitive decline." In the back seat, Kieran's hands clenched into tight fists on his lap, knuckles white. The boy said nothing, but I could see his jaw working, processing understanding more than I wanted him to. Ren had fallen asleep against the window, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, blessedly oblivious. I stared out the dirty windshield at my son's house 2 blocks away. The brown roof, the apple tree in the side yard that I'd planted with my own hands 2 years ago. Dwight had helped dig the hole. We'd worked together in comfortable silence, father and son, preparing the earth for something that would outlive us both. This wasn't an impulsive crime of desperation. This was a cold bureaucratic assassination with industrial chemicals, digital timers, and legal paperwork filed in triplicate. "There's more," Glenn said quietly. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then slid it across the console to me. This wasn't just chemical tanks. There was a Ziploc bag hidden alongside the rigging filled with documents. I photographed everything before we left. My hands shook as I took the phone. The first image showed the crawlspace beneath my bedroom floor, a nightmare of plastic tubing, pressurized canisters, and digital timers with LED displays. The second showed a heavy-duty Ziploc bag, the kind meant for long-term storage stuffed with neatly organized papers. I started swiping through the photographs. The third image, an incompetency petition bearing my name at the top, awaiting only a physician's signature at the bottom. The text was dense, legal, precise. It declared me mentally unfit to manage my own affairs due to progressive cognitive decline and recommended immediate conservatorship placement. Fourth image, glossy brochures for Sunrise Care Facility in Northern Kentucky. One page had been marked with a yellow highlighter, October 28th, 2022. Check-in date, 24 days from today. In 24 days, I would have legally ceased to exist. Fifth image, a quitclaim deed, transferring my entire estate, $520,000 in assets, the house in Vermont, the small investment accounts Constance and I had built over 43 years of careful saving, to Dwight Michael Prescott, sole beneficiary. The signature line at the bottom was blank waiting. Sixth image, a detailed timeline handwritten on lined notebook paper. Dates, doctor appointments, behavioral observations, all meticulously documented. Subject showing increased confusion, refused to take morning medications. Subject became agitated when asked simple questions about current events. Subject left stove burner on for 45 minutes, nearly causing kitchen fire. None of it had happened. All of it would become evidence. Seventh image, the practice sheet. I stared at it for a long time. My name, written in pen across an entire sheet of legal paper. Dozens of attempts, maybe 50 or more. The first few signatures were shaky, erratic, the letters malformed and uneven. By the middle of the page, they had improved, more confident, more consistent. The last signature, bottom right corner, was nearly perfect. The exact slope of my capital H, the distinctive loop in my R, the way my final T crossed with a slight upward flourish. Someone had spent hours sitting in the dark beneath my bedroom floor, practicing my handwriting, until they could forge my signature perfectly. Hours of repetition, dedication, meticulous attention to detail. I stared at that progression, shaky at first, then improving, then nearly perfect, and felt something cold settle in my chest that had no name yet. It would find one later. "I recognize that handwriting," I whispered. Glenn didn't respond. He didn't need to. I handed the phone back to him, my hands numb. "How long has this been running?" Based on the residue patterns and equipment wear, Glenn's jaw tightened. "Months. Maybe since you moved in. Definitely since early spring." 8 months. The timeline matched perfectly. 8 months of headaches. 8 months of feeling slightly off. Slightly confused, blaming it on grief and age and the natural decline of a 68-year-old body. "Why didn't it kill me faster?" I asked. "Because that would raise questions," Glenn said. "Sudden death gets autopsies, investigations, suspicious family members asking uncomfortable questions. But progressive dementia in an elderly widower living with his caring son, nobody questions that. Nobody investigates. The doctors prescribe memory medications, the family sighs sympathetically, and eventually you sign a quitclaim deed transferring everything you own to the person taking such good care of you. Except I wouldn't actually sign it. No," Glenn said, his voice hard, "but someone who'd practiced your signature 50 times could." In the back seat, Kieran had started crying, silently tears streaming down his face, while he stared rigidly forward, refusing to make a sound that might wake his sister. I looked at the phone again at that progression of signatures, shaky, improving, perfect. The slope of the handwriting, the pressure of the pen, the careful formation of each letter. I knew that hand. I'd guided those fingers across lined paper when they were small and uncertain, teaching my 6-year-old son the importance of a man's signature. And he'd use that lesson to erase mine. 24 days until I would cease to exist, which meant I had 23 days to fight back. Fighting back required allies, and I knew exactly where to start. I used Glenn's burner phone to call the only person I'd trusted with my legal affairs for 30 years. Bernard Harrington, the attorney who'd closed on my first house, drafted Constance's will, and whose late wife Eleanor had been my wife's closest companion. If anyone would believe an impossible story about chemical warfare in a Cincinnati suburb, it would be Bernard. Glenn had driven us to a grocery store parking lot, 3 miles from the house, far enough to be safe, public enough to blend in. He stood outside the truck, now leaning against the hood, his eyes scanning the lot with that same tactical precision I'd seen in my bedroom. The phone rang twice before Bernard picked up. "In Harrington." came his familiar gravelly voice. "Bernard, it's me. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you respond." A pause, then go ahead. I told him everything: the headaches, the buckled floor, Glenn's discovery, the chemical vaporization system, the documents, the signature practice sheet. I spoke for maybe 5 minutes straight, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. When I finished, Bernard said nothing. 5 seconds of silence, 10, 15. Then he exhaled a long, heavy sound that carried the weight of 4 decades in law. "I need to give this to you straight," Bernard said, his voice turning grave. "This is classic conservatorship fraud. I've seen it 3 times in 40 years of practice family members fabricating mental decline to gain control of estates, but with a chemical delivery system." Another pause. "Unprecedented. This takes premeditation to a level I've never encountered." Something in my chest loosened, not relief, not comfort. Just the simple knowledge that I wasn't insane, wasn't paranoid, wasn't imagining patterns and random noise. "Stay away from that house," Bernard continued, his tone sharpening into command. "Do not call your son. Do not call anyone else in the family. Do not let them know you're aware of anything. You have photos of what was found?" "Yes, the contractor who discovered it photographed everything." "Send them to my email immediately, and I need you in my office this afternoon, face to face, 3 o'clock. Can you make that? Yes. Good. Don't talk to anyone else until then. Not family, not friends, not the police. We need to be strategic about this." He paused. "And whoever this contractor is, bring him. I'll want to hear his account directly." For the first time since Glenn climbed out of that crawl space, the crushing weight in my chest lifted slightly. I wasn't fighting this war alone anymore. I forwarded Glenn's photographs to Bernard's email, watching the progress bar creep across the screen. Sending, sent. My personal phone, the one I'd left in my pocket, vibrated violently against my leg. Dwight's name appeared on the caller ID. Glenn must have seen my face change because he immediately moved to the truck window. I held up the phone so he could see the screen. He nodded grimly. "Answer it," Glenn said, "but don't tell him where you are." I swiped to accept the call and put it on speaker. "Dad?" Dwight's voice poured through the speaker, frantic, warm, absolutely saturated with concern. "Oh my God, where are you? I came home and you and the kids are gone. The contractor left his truck in the driveway, but nobody's here. Are you okay?" The performance was flawless. If I hadn't seen the signature practice sheet, if I hadn't stared at photographs of chemical tanks beneath my bedroom floor, I would have heard only a devoted son terrified for his aging father's safety. "We're fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just took the kids out for an impromptu lunch. Thought they could use some grandpa time." "Oh." Dwight exhaled deeply, the sound carrying profound relief. "Oh, thank God. You scared me to death, Dad. Lately you've been wandering off without telling anyone where you're going, and A calculated pause. "I'm just so terrified your health is taking a turn." That pause before taking a turn. The slight emphasis on wandering off. The way he'd framed my spontaneous decision as a symptom rather than a choice. Surgical precision. He was building his narrative, creating a verbal record that could be cited later. Dad was confused. Dad was forgetting to tell us where he went. Dad's health was declining. Every word carefully chosen to construct the foundation of a legal case I wasn't supposed to recognize. And I recognized it immediately because I was the one who taught him how to make an argument sound reasonable. When Dwight was 16 and got caught with beer at a party, I'd sat him down and explained how to construct a persuasive explanation to his mother. "Don't deny the facts," I'd told him. "Acknowledge them, but frame the context. Make your version sound more plausible than the worst interpretation." He'd taken that lesson to heart. "I'm fine, son," I said, loading the word son with all the warmth I could fake. "Just wanted to give the kids a treat. We'll be home soon." Okay, good." Another exhale. "I'll have dinner ready when you get back. And Dad, maybe tonight we should talk about, I don't know, maybe setting up a system where you let me know when you're taking the kids somewhere, just so I don't worry. A system where I had to report my movements, where every decision required his awareness, his approval, his record keeping." Sure," I said. "We can talk about that." "Great, I love you, Dad." "Love you too." I hung up. The most devoted son I had ever known, the only man left to carry our family name after Constance passed, was actively constructing my madness with a voice I had cherished for 41 years. Glenn looked at me through the truck window. "He's building his narrative." I nodded slowly, my jaw tight. "I know," I said. "He learned from the best." Glenn looked at me. I didn't explain. In the back seat, Kieran had been listening to the entire conversation. The boy's face had gone pale, his hands clenched in his lap. "Grandpa," he whispered. "That was Dad. That was my dad." "I know, son." He sounded so worried, so normal. "That's what makes it work," I said quietly. Glenn climbed back into the driver's seat and started the engine. "Where to?" "Bernard Harrington's office," I said. 3 o'clock. We have 2 hours. And in those 2 hours, Bernard Harrington would show me just how deep that lie went. Bernard Harrington's law office smelled of rich coffee and aged leather, the same scent that had greeted me 30 years ago when Constance and I closed on our first house, back when life was simple, and I believed the people I loved could never hurt me. The office hadn't changed much. Same mahogany desk, same brass lamp casting warm light across legal documents, same built-in bookshelves lined with statute volumes and case law. Bernard himself looked older than I remembered 71, now his hair completely white, deep lines carved around his eyes, but his gaze was as sharp as ever. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. I sat. Glenn stood by the door, arms crossed, watching. Bernard had already printed Glenn's photographs, all 47 of them, and now he spread them across the mahogany surface in a systematic grid pattern. Chemical equipment in one row, legal documents in another, the signature practice sheet off to the side by itself, like evidence too damning to group with anything else. He pulled a magnifying glass from his desk drawer, the old-fashioned kind with a heavy brass handle, and began examining each photograph in complete silence. I sat motionless and watched. 5 minutes passed, 10, 15. The only sounds were Bernard's breathing, the occasional quiet hum of consideration, the soft rustle of paper as he moved from one image to the next. He studied the chemical configurations with the magnifying glass, tracing connections with his finger, but not touching the photographs themselves. Then the legal documents reading every visible word. Then the signature sheet where he spent the longest time comparing the early attempts to the final perfect forgery. 20 minutes passed. My hands gripped the armrests of the chair fingers, pressing into worn leather. Outside the window, downtown, Cincinnati traffic hummed, normal people living normal lives, unaware that 3 floors above them, a father was watching his son's life be systematically dismantled by photographic evidence. Bernard had bounced Dwight on his knee when my boy was 3 years old, taught him how to shake hands properly at age 7, attended his high school graduation, toasted at his wedding to Celeste with champagne and proud words about family legacy. And now he sat across from me, using words like premeditated and industrial toxins to describe that same child. Finally, Bernard set down the magnifying glass. He removed his reading glasses, folded them carefully, and met my eyes with an expression I'd seen only twice before. Once when he'd delivered Eleanor's terminal diagnosis to his own family, and once when he'd told a client her husband had been embezzling from their joint accounts for 15 years. Grim finality. "I need to give this to you straight," Bernard said, his voice carrying the weight of 4 decades in law. "What we are looking at constitutes first-degree attempted murder under Ohio Revised Code, Section 2903.01. Premeditated poisoning of an elderly victim using banned industrial chemical agents explicitly tied to a fraudulent filing for conservatorship and systematic asset transfer. In the state of Ohio, this is a Category 1 felony carrying a minimum sentence of 15 years to life." The words landed like physical blows. Murder, premeditated, 15 years to life. The chemical delivery system shows extensive planning. Bernard continued tapping one photograph with his finger. The legal documents show financial motive. The signature practice sheet shows intent to commit fraud. And the timeline, he pulled out a yellow legal pad where he'd been taking notes. The timeline suggests this conspiracy has been active for approximately 8 months, possibly longer. "Since I moved in," I said quietly. "Yes." Bernard's jaw tightened. "Which means the invitation to live with your son may have been part of the initial plan, not a gesture of familial care. That thought that even the moment I'd felt most loved and protected had been tactical manipulation threatened to break something fundamental in my chest. "I know your boy Harvey," Bernard said, and his voice had gone soft. "I've watched him grow up over 30 years. I bounced him on my knee. I gave him advice about college applications. I don't want to say these words to you, but the physical evidence leaves me no alternative. I wasn't a father seeking family counseling anymore. I was a crime victim filing charges against my own son for attempted murder. What do we do?" I asked. Bernard pulled a medical authorization form from his desk drawer and slid it across the mahogany surface. His pen clicked once in the heavy silence. "Before we file a single motion with the court," he said, "before we contact law enforcement, before we do anything that creates an irreversible legal record, I need you to get a comprehensive toxicology blood panel done immediately. Full spectrum analysis. Every industrial chemical compound, every heavy metal, every trace element that shouldn't be in a human body." He tapped the paper with one finger. "We need undeniable medical forensics, Harvey. The photographs are damning. Glenn's testimony will be powerful, but defense attorneys will argue the equipment was never actually used, that it was stored there for legitimate purposes, that the documents were hypothetical exercises. What they can't argue against is poison in your bloodstream matched to the specific compounds in those tanks." I picked up the authorization form. My hands were shaking again. Once I get the blood works, I said, what happens next? We file an emergency protective order. We notify law enforcement. We begin criminal prosecution. Bernard's expression was grave. And Harvey, I need you to understand something clearly. Once we start this process, there is no going back. No family mediation, no quiet resolution. Your son will be arrested, he will be charged, and based on this evidence, he will very likely be convicted and sentenced to decades in prison. He tried to kill me. I said the words feeling unreal even as I spoke them. Yes, Bernard said simply. He did. I looked at the authorization form, standard medical release language, a signature line at the bottom. My real signature, not the forgery my son had practiced 50 times in the darkness beneath my bedroom floor. There's an urgent care clinic 2 blocks from here, Bernard said. They can do the draw today and rush the analysis. Results in 48 hours. He paused. Glenn should go with you. Don't go anywhere alone until we know how extensive this conspiracy is. You think it's more than just Dwight? I think anyone who could construct this level of premeditation didn't do it in complete isolation, Bernard said carefully. The legal documents are too sophisticated. Someone with knowledge helped draft them. The blood work would prove what Glenn's photographs only suggested, and what it revealed would be far worse than either of us imagined. The needle slid into my vein at 5 o'clock Tuesday evening, drawing blood that would prove with clinical undeniable certainty that my own son had been poisoning me for 8 months. The urgent care clinic smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. The phlebotomist, a woman in her 40s named Lynn Caldwell, worked with practiced efficiency, tying the rubber tourniquet around my upper arm, tapping the crook of my elbow to find the vein swabbing the site with alcohol that felt cold against my skin. Comprehensive toxicology panel, she said, reading Bernard's authorization form. That's going to be 7 vials. You'll feel a pinch. The needle was sharp and precise. I watched my blood flow into the first vial, dark red ordinary, carrying poison I couldn't see. Bernard waited in the lobby with Kieran and Wren. I'd asked him to keep them away from this part to shield them from watching their grandfather become evidence in a criminal case against their own father. Some things children shouldn't have to witness. Lynn labeled the first vial with a barcode sticker. Heavy metals panel, she said more to herself than to me. She removed it from the needle and attached a second vial. Industrial solvents. The blood kept flowing. Vial 3, vial 4. My phone sitting on the exam table beside me buzzed. Bernard's encrypted line. I glanced at Lynn. Go ahead, she said. Just keep your arm still. I answered with my free hand. Yes. Harvey. Bernard's voice was tight. Glenn just called. He went back to the cavity one final time before we sealed it for evidence preservation. There's something else? Vial 5, neurotoxin screening. What did he find? A ledger. Navy blue hardcover buried at the very back of the cavity where he almost missed it. He's sending me digital scans right now. Lynn attached vial 6, complete metabolic panel. What kind of ledger? The kind you write murder in, Bernard said quietly. I'll have the scans by the time you're done. Meet me in the waiting room. He ended the call. The phlebotomist labeled each vial with clinical precision. Heavy metals, industrial solvents, neurotoxins, metabolic markers. While my phone waited to display my son's handwriting, calculating exactly how much poison my body weight could tolerate. 2 men, 2 different kinds of measurement, both reducing me to numbers on a page. Lynn removed the needle-pressed gauze against the puncture site, taped it down. Keep pressure on that for 5 minutes. Results will be sent to your physician within 48 hours, but your attorney put a rush on the order. You should have preliminary findings by tomorrow afternoon. Thank you. She gathered the 7 vials into a biohazard bag, labeled it, and left the room. I sat on the exam table for a moment, pressing the gauze against my arm, feeling my pulse beat against my fingertips. Then I walked to the waiting room. Bernard sat in a corner chair, phone in hand, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. Kieran and Wren occupied themselves with outdated magazines, pointedly not asking questions about what was happening. Bernard looked up as I approached. Sit. I sat beside him. He angled the phone so we could both see the screen, then opened the first scanned image. Navy blue cover, hard-bound. The kind of ledger an accountant might use, or someone keeping meticulous records they never intended anyone else to see. Bernard swiped to the next image. The first page opened to lined paper filled with handwriting I'd been reading for 41 years. Dwight's careful script, the same hand that had written elementary school book reports and college application essays and wedding vows. The same slope to his letters, the same pressure on certain words for emphasis. But the content, the first entry read like a research paper, written in my son's careful hand. A banned industrial solvent, its properties, its effects on the human nervous system at low chronic doses. The language was clinical and precise, how it mimicked dementia, onset, how long before the damage became irreversible. Below that, calculations. My body weight. Exposure timelines. Estimated days to symptomatic presentation. Numbers as cold and deliberate as a contractor's bid, except the project was my mind, and the deadline was my death. Bernard swiped to the next page. More calculations, dosage adjustments, symptom tracking checkpoints, a timeline of when to introduce the conservatorship petition, when to schedule the physician evaluation, when to have the quitclaim deed ready for signature. Every step planned, every detail calculated, every outcome engineered. "This is his handwriting," Bernard asked quietly. "You're absolutely certain?" "I've read that hand for 41 years, I said. "I taught him cursive at the kitchen table when he was 7. That's Dwight." Bernard swiped back to the first page and enlarged the image. Top right corner, a date. December 14th, 2021. My mind went blank for a moment, refusing to process what that meant. Then the memory surfaced sharp and clear. February 10th, 2022, Thursday evening. I'd been sitting in my empty house in Manchester, eating dinner alone for the 100th night in a row since Constance died. The phone rang. Dwight's name on the caller ID. I remembered his voice, the thickness in it, like he'd been crying, the words tumbling out in a rush of emotion and concern. "Dad, I've been thinking about you living all alone in that big house. It's not good for you. The kids miss you. We miss you. Come live with us. Please. We have that second-floor bedroom all set up. You shouldn't be by yourself anymore." I'd been touched, moved, grateful that my son cared enough to offer that he wanted his old father close. I remembered every word of that conversation, Dwight's voice breaking, when he said how worried he was about my health, how the kids needed their grandfather, how families should stick together. Every word had been a lie written 58 days earlier in blue ink. December 14th, 2021, the first ledger entry. February 10th, 2022, the tearful phone call. 58 days, almost 2 months. He'd researched the chemicals, calculated the dosages, planned the legal strategy, and engineered every step of my destruction before he ever picked up the phone and asked me to come home. The invitation wasn't an act of love. It was the execution phase of a murder plot. "Harvey." Bernard's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" I stared at the first page of that ledger on his phone screen. December 14th, 2021, written in my son's careful hand. And the bloodwork 7 vials sealed in a biohazard bag, rushing to a laboratory where technicians would measure exactly how well Dwight had executed his plan with lethal precision from the moment I'd crossed his threshold. The laboratory results came back Wednesday morning, 36 hours faster than standard processing. Bernard's rush order, backed by the severity of the allegations, had pushed my bloodwork to the front of the queue. Viveka Wolf. The 45-year-old Adult Protective Services investigator assigned to my case sat across the conference table in the Hamilton County APS office with the kind of professional neutrality that told me she'd heard 1,000 improbable stories from elderly complainants and believed almost none of them. "Mr. Prescott," she said, her pen poised over a standardized intake form. "I need to ask you some preliminary questions before we proceed. Do you have any documented history of psychiatric illness?" "No." "Are you currently prescribed any cognitive medications, memory aids, dementia treatments, anything that might affect your mental clarity?" "No." "Has there been a prior history of financial disputes with your son? Arguments over money, disagreements about inheritance, anything of that nature?" "No." She made notes with mechanical efficiency, her expression never shifting. I'd seen that look before on the faces of customer service representatives who'd mastered the art of polite disengagement, of processing complaints without actually engaging with the human being making them. Bernard sat beside me in silence, his leather briefcase resting on the table. He hadn't said a word since we'd entered the room, letting the interview unfold at its own pace. Viveka continued down her checklist. "And you claim your son installed chemical equipment beneath your bedroom floor with the intent to, or stammed?" Bernard slid a manila folder across the conference table. Viveka stopped mid-sentence, her eyes flicking to the folder, then to Bernard. "Certified laboratory toxicology report," Bernard said quietly. "Rush processed. Released to counsel this morning." Viveka opened the folder. I watched her eyes scan the first page, then stop, then scan it again more slowly this time. Her pen halted mid-note. Then her head snapped up, and for the first time since we'd sat down, I saw actual emotion break through her professional mask. "His blood solvent level for trichloroethylene is 3.2 times above lethal toxicity thresholds." She said, her voice flat with controlled shock. 3.2 times. That's not trace exposure. That's chronic poisoning. Heavy silence filled the room. Viveka flipped to the second page, reading faster now. "This is an industrial compound banned from residential use by Ohio statute and the Environmental Protection Agency since 2016. The only legal applications are in controlled manufacturing facilities with full ventilation and protective equipment." She set the report down carefully, as if it might detonate. For the first time since Glenn climbed out of that crawl space, I watched a stranger look at objective scientific data and choose to believe me over my own son, not because of tears or persuasion, but because numbers don't lie. I'm securing an emergency criminal search warrant within the hour, Viveka said, standing abruptly and snapping her briefcase shut. This is no longer a family services matter. This is attempted murder. She left the room without another word, already pulling her phone from her jacket pocket. Bernard and I sat in the empty conference room for a long moment. And that went better than expected, he said finally. She believed it. The report believed it, Bernard corrected. She just had the professional integrity to accept the evidence. We returned to Bernard's office that afternoon. The mahogany desk was covered with documents, now printouts of Glenn's photographs, copies of the ledger scans, the toxicology report, legal briefs on conservatorship fraud statutes. Bernard sat at his computer, cross-referencing information from the seized dossier against live financial transactions. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, navigating databases and payment processing systems I didn't fully understand. Then he stopped. I found something, he said. I moved behind his chair to see the screen. Sunrise Care Facility, Bernard said, pointing to a transaction record. 12 miles outside Cincinnati, specializes in memory care and closed-ward dementia patients. There's an active transaction linked to your Social Security number. He clicked through to the details. Non-refundable reservation deposit, $5,000. Processed under your identity, but funded via cash advance from Dwight's primary credit account. Bernard's jaw tightened. Payment date February 15th, 2022. 5 days after he invited you to move in. The room felt suddenly airless. And here, Bernard said, scrolling down. Mandatory check-in date. The screen displayed a calendar interface with one date highlighted in yellow. October is the 28th, 2022. I did the mental math automatically. Today was October 5th, 24 days. In 24 days, I would have been admitted to a locked memory care facility as an incompetent patient. Once you're admitted under involuntary guardianship, Bernard explained, his voice carefully controlled, you lose all civil rights, no ability to contest contracts, no authority to sign documents, no legal autonomy whatsoever. Your entire estate, all $520,000 in assets, falls under the guardian's absolute uncontested management. 24 days. In less than a month, I would have been a ward of the state signing away my life with a signature my son had practiced forging dozens of times in the dark. The deposit is non-refundable, Bernard continued, which means Dwight committed $5,000 of real money to this timeline. He was so certain of his plan's success that he paid cash to guarantee your admission date. I stared at that highlighted date. October 28th. 3 weeks and 3 days from now. If the timeline had held, I said slowly, if Glenn hadn't found the equipment, if I hadn't gotten out, you'd be admitted in 24 days, Bernard finished. Declared legally incompetent, stripped of all rights, and every document in that dossier, the conservatorship petition, the quitclaim, deed the power of attorney transfers would be filed and processed within 72 hours of your admission. How long would I have been there? Bernard met my eyes. The average length of stay for closed ward memory care patients is 14 months, but Harvey, given the toxicity levels already in your bloodstream and the continued exposure you would have faced, he paused. The medical examiner I consulted estimates you would have experienced complete neurological failure within 6 to 9 months. After that, it's just a matter of waiting for organ systems to shut down. I sank into the leather chair across from his desk. My son had paid $5,000 to secure the exact date I would legally cease to exist. The deposit was non-refundable, which meant he'd been so certain of his plan's success that he'd committed real money to a countdown I wasn't supposed to survive long enough to see. October 28th, 2022, 24 days. But Dwight hadn't counted on one thing: I was still alive, still conscious. And now I had exactly 23 days to dismantle everything he'd built. Dismantling a conspiracy required more than emotion. It required evidence that could survive courtroom scrutiny, evidence that couldn't be explained away by clever attorneys or dismissed as family misunderstanding. Glenn Garrison looked up from his laptop Wednesday evening in Bernard's office and said something that seemed completely unrelated to poisoning. Have you checked your son's electricity bills? I blinked. What? Smart meters, Glenn said, turning the laptop toward Bernard. Most municipalities installed them 5-6 years ago. They track electrical consumption by zone, bedroom, kitchen, living room. Creates a digital footprint of usage patterns. Bernard leaned forward, understanding immediately. And a vaporization pump would show up as consistent draw above baseline. Glenn finished. Industrial equipment leaves signatures. Chemical vaporization requires heat pressure sustained power. If that pump was running under your floor for months, it's been consuming electricity the whole time. Dwight added me to the energy account when I moved in, I said slowly. My name's on the bills. Then we can subpoena the records, Bernard said, already reaching for his phone. 2 hours later, we had them. Spreadsheets from the Cincinnati Power Company broken down by zone and consumption period, stretching back 18 months. Glenn mapped the metrics onto his laptop, creating a visual graph that made the pattern impossible to miss. Here, he said, pointing to the bedroom line. Flat consumption from August 2021 through January 2022. Matches every other bedroom in a comparable home. Lighting maybe a clock radio phone charger. Standard residential draw. His finger moved to February 2022. Then this. The bedroom line spiked upward and stayed there. Starting March 2022. Glenn continued. Your bedroom's electrical consumption surged 23 to 31%, above every other zone in the house. Not occasional spikes. Sustained continuous draw. For 7 months straight. I stared at the graph. The numbers were clinical, undeniable, impossible to fabricate or misinterpret. That's not standard appliances, Glenn said. You didn't add a space heater or a dehumidifier or any device that would explain this pattern. This is the electrical footprint of high-pressure chemical vaporization equipment running on a hidden cyclical relay consuming power every single night. March 2022. The memory surfaced with perfect clarity. Dwight standing in my bedroom doorway with his toolbox, his face bright with sweat, despite the cool weather hammer in hand. Dad, let me reseal this room for you. Weather stripping's getting old. Don't want you catching a draft this winter. I've got you covered. I'd stood in that doorway watching him work around the window frames, the door jamb, carefully applying fresh caulk and weather stripping with the focused attention of someone who cared about the details. Feeling grateful, feeling lucky to have a son who thought about these things. Every memory of love I possessed was being systematically inverted into evidence of premeditated murder. He sealed the room, I said quietly, to contain the vapor. Keep it concentrated. Make sure it worked. Glenn nodded. And the electrical consumption confirms operation began immediately after. This isn't speculation or theory. This is physical evidence from a third-party utility provider showing continuous criminal activity for 7 months. Bernard saved the spreadsheet, added it to the growing evidence file, and made a note on his legal pad. Tomorrow morning, he said, I'm taking this to your family physician. Dr. Graham Mercer's clinic occupied the second floor of a medical building on the east side of Cincinnati. I'd been his patient for 12 years, routine physicals, the occasional flu blood pressure monitoring as I aged. A good doctor, thorough, someone I'd trusted completely. Bernard went alone to that Thursday morning appointment, carrying the certified toxicology report in his briefcase. He called me an hour later, his voice tight. You need to hear this directly from Dr. Mercer, he said. I'm putting you on speaker. A different voice came through the phone, older shaken. Mr. Prescott, this is Graham Mercer. I need to apologize. For what? Your attorney just showed me your toxicology results. A long pause. The trichloroethylene levels are consistent with chronic industrial poisoning, but according to my own diagnostic files, you've been showing progressive cognitive decline for months. I documented it. I believed it. Another pause. I could hear papers rustling. Except I didn't document it. Dr. Mercer continued, his voice breaking slightly. Not all of it. There's a 4-page symptom log appended to your electronic health record. Daily observations, memory lapses, disorientation, behavioral changes, all dated, all detailed, all written, with exceptional clinical precision. Who wrote it? I asked, though I already knew. Your son delivered them personally at every appointment over the past 6 months, Dr. Mercer said. He presented them as a concerned caregiver's notes tracking your symptoms to help me make an accurate diagnosis. I trusted him. I incorporated them directly into my diagnostic assessment without independent verification. My family doctor, a man I'd trusted with 12 years of health records, had been turned into an unwitting architect of my own legal incompetence declaration, one fabricated symptom log at a time. The clinical precision, Bernard said. Tell him. The logs are written with knowledge of elder care legal standards, Dr. Mercer said. Specific terminology. Exact symptom categories that align with conservatorship petition requirements. This wasn't written by an anxious son. This was written by someone with advanced training in contested estate cases. His wife, Bernard said, Celeste, senior paralegal at a firm specializing in asset preservation litigation. She knew exactly what language would convince a physician, exactly what symptoms would support a competency challenge. I thought about Celeste at family dinners, always quiet, always observant. I'd thought she was shy. Turns out she'd been studying. There's something else, Dr. Mercer said, his voice dropping to near whisper. I'm looking at the administrative attachment section of your file right now. There's a document here I have no memory of creating. What kind of document? Bernard asked. A cognitive capacity assessment summary, 2 pages. formally validates findings of severe cognitive degradation consistent with early-stage progressive dementia. It's dated September 22nd, 2022. It has my signature at the bottom. Silence on the line. But I don't remember signing it, Dr. Mercer said. I don't remember reviewing it. I don't remember authorizing it at all. Bernard's voice turned sharp. May I see it? I'm pulling the hard copy from archives right now, Dr. Mercer said. Can you come back to the clinic and bore? What they found in that buried file would prove the conspiracy had already infiltrated the legal system itself. Dr. Mercer crossed his office to the filing cabinet, hands visibly trembling as he pulled the drawer open to find the hard copy of the document that shouldn't exist. Bernard and I waited in tense silence while he rifled through manila folders stuffed with administrative paperwork, insurance claims, billing forms, compliance documentation. The kind of bureaucratic debris that accumulated in any medical practice filed away and forgotten until subpoena or audit demanded retrieval. Here, Dr. Mercer said, finally pulling out a thin folder. September patient administrative processing. He opened it on his desk. 2 pages, official letterhead, dense text formatted in medical legal language, and at the bottom, his signature in blue ink. Cognitive capacity assessment summary. Patient name Harvey James Prescott. Dr. Mercer's face had gone pale. I remember this now, not the content, just the moment. Walk us through it, Bernard said quietly. End of the day, September 22nd. I'd been running behind all afternoon, emergency walk-ins, prescription renewals, 2 Medicare audit calls. Celeste was waiting in the lobby when I finished your 3rd examination. He pointed to the date on the form. She said she had paperwork that needed my signature before the billing cycle closed. He picked up the document, his hands still shaking slightly. Thick stack of Medicare reimbursement forms, maybe 20 pages. Standard insurance compliance documentation requiring routine physician sign-off. I was exhausted. She apologized for catching me at the end of my shift, but said it was time-sensitive for the insurance processing deadline. I watched understanding dawn across Bernard's face. You didn't read every page, Bernard said. I scanned the first few, standard language, diagnosis codes, procedure, justifications, medication, authorizations. All routine. All legitimate medical records tied to your actual appointments. Dr. Mercer's voice dropped. This was buried in the middle, page 11 of 20. I signed the stack without verifying every individual line. I watched Dr. Mercer transform from unknowing victim to fierce ally. In the span of 10 minutes, his professional integrity had been weaponized without consent, and he was taking it back with the full force of medical authority. My signature here, Dr. Mercer continued, his finger jabbing at the bottom of the page, formally validates a finding that you demonstrated severe cognitive degradation consistent with early-stage progressive dementia. Recommendation for immediate conservatorship evaluation. Medical basis for involuntary guardianship. But you never made that diagnosis, Bernard said. I never even considered it. Your actual cognitive function has been completely normal in every examination. No memory issues, no confusion, no decline whatsoever. He set the document down carefully, as if it might contaminate something. This document hasn't been filed with probate court yet. They were holding it. As an ace, Bernard said. Ready to deploy the moment Harvey attempted to access his funds or contest the conservatorship petition. Exactly. Dr. Mercer stood, his professional composure hardening into something colder. I am filing an emergency affidavit with the State Medical Board this afternoon to formally retract this document and issue a corrected finding of full cognitive competence. And I will personally testify at any hearing, criminal or civil, to expose how my signature was fraudulently obtained. Bernard nodded once. We'll need that affidavit by end of business today. You'll have it in 2 hours. That afternoon, back at Bernard's office, a different kind of expert sat across from us. Forensic document examiner, certified by the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners, the kind of witness whose testimony could survive appellate review. She'd spent the morning analyzing the quitclaim deed signature against my actual signatures from decades of legal documents, tax returns, property deeds, medical authorizations, banking records. Now, she laid out her findings with clinical precision. The signature on the asset transfer document is a skilled forgery, she said, pointing to enlarged photographs showing microscopic stroke analysis. The overall shape mimics the genuine signature, but the physical pressure profiles are inconsistent with natural handwriting patterns. She slid another image across the desk, one of the practice sheets from Glenn's photographs. These practice attempts show progressive improvement in replicating the target signature. Early attempts exhibit hesitation marks, uneven pressure, conscious effort to copy rather than write naturally. Later attempts achieve near-perfect visual replication. Can you identify the forger? Bernard asked. The baseline stroke mechanics on the practice sheets match the ink pressure profiles found in this document. She produced a photograph of Dwight's blue ledger, Same hand, same writer. Whoever created the practice sheets also wrote the entries in this ledger. My son. My boy. Sitting in the darkness beneath my bedroom floor, practicing my signature dozens of times until he could replicate it perfectly. Not outsourcing the crime to some professional forger, doing it himself by hand with the same meticulous patience I'd taught him. I was the one who taught him penmanship, holding his 6-year-old fingers, showing him how to form each letter with care and intention, guiding the pencil across lined paper in our kitchen in Manchester, while Constance made dinner and the evening light came golden through the windows. A man's signature is his bond son. I'd told him, my voice patient and proud. Make it distinct. Make it yours. People will judge your character by how you sign your name. He'd listen so carefully, asked me to show him again, practiced for weeks until his signature was clear and confident. I never imagined those same careful strokes would one day erase my legal existence. The forensic examiner packed up her materials, leaving copies of her analysis for Bernard's evidence file. After she left, I sat in the leather chair, staring at the photographs spread across the mahogany desk. Practice sheet progression, shaky attempts, improving precision, final perfect forgery. I remembered Dwight at 6 years old, tongue pressed between his teeth in concentration, his small hand wrapped around a pencil, too large for his fingers. Me sitting behind him at the kitchen table, my hand covering his, guiding the loops and curves. Like this, see smooth motion. Don't lift the pen until you're done with the whole name. Will my signature be as good as yours someday, Dad? Better, son, because you're learning the right way from the start. I stared at the forensic report showing the progression of his forgery practice. First attempts shaky and uncertain, final attempts nearly perfect replicas of my own hand. I remembered sitting behind my 6-year-old son at the kitchen table, guiding his small fingers across lined paper, my voice patient and proud. A man's signature is his bond son. Make it distinct, make it yours. And he had used that bond to try to steal my life. But understanding how he'd stolen my signature was only the beginning. The question remained, why go to such elaborate lengths? Bernard's computer chimed with a financial network alert Friday morning, and the number that appeared on his screen, $300,000, made him push back from his desk and reach for the phone. Harvey, he said when I answered. Get to my office, now. I arrived 20 minutes later to find him staring at his monitor, his face gray. What is it? A supplemental life insurance policy, Bernard said, turning the screen toward me. $300,000, opened 6 months ago under your social security number. Sole designated beneficiary, Dwight Michael Prescott. The room tilted slightly. I never opened any life insurance policy. I know. Bernard pulled up another window. The monthly premium payments have been auto-debiting from your checking account for half a year. Disguised as a recurring utility charge, you probably never noticed because it matched the pattern of your normal bills. He clicked to the application documents. The signature on the application has already been verified by our forensic examiner. Another forgery. Same hand that practiced your name 50 times beneath your bedroom floor. I sank into the leather chair, the implications assembling themselves with terrible clarity. Let me show you the math, Bernard said, pulling out his legal pad. Your estate at the Vermont Property Investment Account savings is worth approximately $520,000. Add this insurance policy, $820,000 total. He wrote the numbers in neat columns. Dwight's outstanding debt based on the financial records we've subpoenaed, $380,000. Mortgage arrears, credit cards, business loans, tax liens. If he'd succeeded in having you declared incompetent and admitted to that facility, and if you died there from continued chemical exposure within the projected 6 to 9 months, Bernard circled a number at the bottom of his calculations. He would have netted $440,000 in profit after clearing all his debts. This wasn't a desperate son trying to survive crushing debt. This was a calculating predator who saw his aging father as a $440,000 windfall. The life insurance policy was opened in April. I said, slowly doing my own mental math. 2 months after I moved in, right when the chemical exposure would have been establishing consistent patterns in my bloodstream. Exactly, Bernard said. He waited until the poisoning was underway before securing the payout mechanism, making sure the investment would yield returns. I thought about Dwight's voice on the phone when he'd invited me to live with him, the thickness in his throat, the concern, the love, all of it calculated, all of it engineered, not just to solve a debt problem, but to profit from my death. There's something else, Bernard said. He pulled a thick file from his desk drawer. I've been tracking Celeste's background, her employment history before she married your son. He opened the file, revealing pages of legal documents, settlement agreements, and investigative reports. 4 years ago, Celeste worked as a senior paralegal at a prominent estate litigation firm in Louisville, Kentucky. Prestigious practice, high net worth clients, very specialized work in contested asset preservation. Bernard slid a document across the desk. She was subjected to an intensive internal criminal investigation for allegedly fabricating power of attorney documents for a wealthy, isolated 79-year-old client. The client was systematically stripped of her entire liquid portfolio before an external auditor caught the discrepancy. My hands went cold. The law firm settled with the victim's estate out of court to protect their reputation, Bernard continued. They terminated Celeste immediately and bound everyone involved to a strict non-disclosure agreement. No public criminal record exists. No charges were ever filed. The whole thing was buried under corporate legal privilege. Before I tell you what Bernard discovered in that Louisville file, I need to ask. Do you think Dwight knew about Celeste's background when he married her? Or did he find out later? Comment A, if you think he knew from the start. Or B, if you think he discovered it afterward. Please note, the next part contains some recreated details for narrative impact. What matters is the pattern they reveal. Dwight knew, I said quietly. Didn't he? They started dating 6 months after she was fired, Bernard said. He knew exactly what she'd been investigated for. He knew she had the expertise to execute complex estate fraud. He didn't corrupt an innocent wife, Harvey. He deliberately partnered with an expert. My son hadn't fallen into temptation. He'd walked down the aisle 4 years ago, holding hands with a woman whose resume included systematically destroying another elderly victim, and he'd chosen her precisely because of that expertise. The methodology, I said, the fabricated symptom logs, the buried medical documents, the careful timing, that was all her. She taught him how to make it look legitimate, Bernard confirmed. How to weaponize medical authority, how to construct a legal framework that would survive initial scrutiny. This wasn't amateur hour, Harvey. This was a professional operation. He pulled another document from the file, a fax freshly printed. I hired a private investigator to track down the Kentucky victim, Bernard said, to see if she'd be willing to testify about Celeste's methods, to establish pattern evidence. He slid the fax across his desk, his finger tapping the final paragraph. The 79-year-old woman is still alive, still coherent. Living in a basic state-assisted facility outside Louisville, she lost everything: her home, her savings, her independence. The NDA prevented her from speaking publicly, and the firm's settlement included a clause threatening legal action if she ever discussed the case. I looked at the investigator's notes, the woman's name, her current address, the final assessment. According to the investigator, Bernard said quietly, she remembers every single detail of how Celeste systematically stripped her of her life savings, the fake documents, the substituted paperwork, the overnight asset transfers, all of it. The woman had been silenced by corporate lawyers and NDA threats for 4 years, watching her abuser walk away without criminal charges, living in state-funded poverty, while Celeste moved on to her next victim. But she was about to find her voice again. That voice came sooner than I expected. The face that appeared on Bernard's monitor screen that afternoon belonged to a woman I'd never met, but whose story I already knew by heart. Dorothy Brennan, 79 years old, and living in a Kentucky state-assisted facility, about to give voice to the nightmare we both shared. She sat propped up in a facility bed, the institutional beige walls behind her speaking volumes about what Celeste had taken from her. Though frail, her eyes were sharp and focused, carrying the weight of someone who had survived systematic predation and never forgotten a single detail. Mr. Prescott, she said, her voice slow and deliberate. Thank you for taking my call. Thank you for being willing to talk to us, I said. I've kept silent for 4 years, Dorothy said, because the high-priced corporate lawyers who handled my settlement told me I'd lose my state care vouchers if I spoke publicly about what happened. They made me sign papers that said I could never discuss the case. I was exhausted. I was terrified, so I signed. She looked directly into the camera, and I saw the same anger I'd been carrying for the past week. But I haven't forgotten a single face, she continued. And when Mr. Harrington's investigator contacted me yesterday and told me what Celeste tried to do to you, I knew I had to speak. Bernard leaned forward. Can you walk us through what happened to you? Dorothy took a breath, gathering her thoughts. It started slowly. Celeste worked at the firm that handled my late husband's estate. She was kind, professional. She'd call to check on me, make sure I understood the paperwork offer to help with complicated legal language. I thought she was just being thorough. I recognized the pattern immediately, the careful cultivation of trust. Then she started suggesting I consolidate accounts to make management easier, sign simple authorizations so she could handle routine transactions on my behalf. Standard estate administration, she said, nothing unusual. Dorothy's hands tightened on the blanket covering her lap. The documents she had me sign during those routine appointments weren't standard forms. She'd slip real transfer authorizations into stacks of normal paperwork, one signature buried on page 7 of a 20-page packet. I was signing away my assets without knowing it. How did you discover it? Bernard asked. An external auditor caught a discrepancy during a random compliance check. By then, my entire liquid portfolio had been legally dissolved overnight. $260,000 gone. The firm settled to protect their reputation, gave me enough to keep me fed and housed, and made me promise never to speak. 2 elderly victims separated by 4 years and 1,500 miles, connected by the same calculating legal predator. But this time, one of us had caught them before the trap closed completely. Dorothy looked directly at me through the screen. You caught them before the concrete dried, sir. You still have your assets. You have your health. You have the strength to fight them. Her voice strengthened. Fight them for both of us. I will, I said quietly. After the call ended, Bernard made notes on his legal pad. Using the authenticated pattern from your Ohio case, he said, my colleagues in Louisville have filed an emergency motion to void Dorothy's NDA on public policy grounds. We're arguing that the agreement was used to conceal ongoing criminal activity. If we win, it opens a pathway for her to reclaim her stolen funds. Justice delayed, perhaps, but not denied. That evening, Glenn arrived at Bernard's office with a thick folder of financial records. We'd moved into what Bernard called war room mode, mapping every piece of evidence, connecting every thread, building an airtight case. I've been tracking Dwight's commercial shell companies, Glenn said, spreading documents across the conference table. His failed luxury development project in Columbus. It defaulted 18 months ago, triggering a lawsuit from 2 aggressive private lenders. He pulled out a formal demand letter, official letterhead legal language. Primary creditor Boyd Ramsey. This letter was sent to Dwight on October 5th, exactly 2 days ago. It gives him a hard, non-negotiable 18-day deadline to settle the full balance of $380,000 or face immediate involuntary bankruptcy filings. Bernard's head snapped up. October 5th? 2 days ago, Glenn confirmed, which means his absolute deadline to pay is October 23rd. I watched Bernard do the mental math, his expression darkening. Once bankruptcy is filed publicly, Bernard said any guardianship application would be instantly scrutinized and rejected by the probate judge. No court in the country grants conservatorship over an estate to someone actively drowning in predatory debt and financial collapse. The guardianship dies the moment bankruptcy becomes public record. Glenn nodded. Which means Dwight's absolute deadline to secure legal access to your assets is October 23rd. But the facility check-in date, the date you'd be institutionalized and lose all legal autonomy, is October 28th. He drew a timeline on Bernard's whiteboard. Gap between those dates, exactly 5 days. 5-day operational window to seize the assets, pay the creditor, and prevent the bankruptcy filing that would expose everything. 18 days, a 5-day operational window, 2 interlocking clocks ticking down to my legal extinction, and my son had calculated every second before the first drop of poison ever entered my bloodstream. He needed you certified legally incompetent before October 23rd. Glenn continued. That's when the guardianship paperwork had to be filed and approved. Once he had legal authority over your estate, he could execute the asset transfers, pay Ramsey, and avoid bankruptcy. Then he'd have you admitted to the facility on the 28th, where continued chemical exposure would finish the job within 6 to 9 months. I stared at the timeline Glenn had mapped on the whiteboard. October 23rd, October 28th. The creditor deadline, the facility deadline, the 5-day gap where I would cease to be human and become transferable asset. But we escaped on October 4th, I said slowly. 1 day before the creditor letter arrived. Which means, Bernard said, Dwight is now facing an 18-day countdown to financial annihilation, with no legal access to your assets. He can't pay Ramsey, he can't stop the bankruptcy, and he can't execute the guardianship because you're under APS protection and criminal investigation. Glenn capped the marker. His perfect timeline just collapsed. I stared at those dates, 18 days to pay or face bankruptcy. My son was running a desperate race against 2 ticking clocks, and I had just cut the wires to both. But desperate men don't surrender quietly, and I was about to learn just how far Dwight would go when his perfect plan began to collapse. The first sign that Dwight's collapse would bring others down with him came Saturday morning, delivered by the last person I expected, my 14-year-old grandson. Kieran sat straight in Bernard's leather chair, his hands no longer trembling as they rested on his smartphone. The anxious tremor that had defined him for weeks was gone, replaced by the stillness of someone who had crossed a threshold and could not turn back. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "I need to show you something I recorded 3 weeks ago." Bernard leaned forward. I felt my chest tighten. Kieran's fingers moved across the screen with purpose. September 28th. I was staying with Uncle Dennis and Aunt Monica while everything was happening at your house. They thought I was asleep. He set the phone on Bernard's desk screen, facing us. They were talking in the living room, loud enough that I could hear through my bedroom wall. I didn't understand everything they were saying, but I knew it was about you. So I turned on my voice recorder, walked to the hallway, and placed my phone on the bookshelf. Then I went back to bed. My other son, Dennis. 43 years old, living 2 hours away. Someone I'd always thought was the responsible one, the one who called every Sunday, the one who'd seemed genuinely worried when Dwight said I was showing signs of confusion. The recording is 23 minutes long, Kieran said. I've listened to it 4 times. I kept waiting for a reason not to show you. I couldn't find one. Bernard nodded once. Play it. Kieran pressed play. Static, movement, then voices distant but clear. Monica first. My daughter-in-law's voice carrying that same efficient tone I'd always mistaken for competence. The power of attorney was forged on August 15th. Clean signature, no hesitation marks. Even if someone questions it later, the timeline supports our narrative. Harvey signed it before the cognitive decline became obvious. Dennis responded, his voice lower, but unmistakable. And the conservatorship hearing is locked for October 21st. Confirmed. Richard has already filed the preliminary motion. As long as we keep Harvey isolated until then, the petition goes through unopposed. Have you ever heard your own son's voice plotting your erasure? Not in metaphor, not in memory, but in digital clarity, time-stamped and irrefutable. What about the estate valuation? Dennis asked on the recording. Bernard's going to question the numbers. Gerald's handling it, Monica said. The Vermont property appraisal came in at $340,000. Actual market value is closer to $520,000, but Gerald made sure the low assessment went into the official filing. Once the conservatorship is granted, we control the liquidation. The undervaluation works in our favor. Lower estate value means less scrutiny. Bernard made a note on his legal pad. I sat frozen. The recording continued. Dennis and Monica discussing timelines, legal procedures, asset transfers, clinical, methodical, utterly devoid of conscience. Then, at what must have been minute 19 or 20, a third voice entered the audio. Male, older, authoritative. Monica, do you have a moment? Of course, Gerald. Dennis, I'll call you back. Footsteps, a door closing. Then Monica's voice again, quieter now, speaking to someone else. Is everything set for the 14th? The male voice, Gerald, responded with practiced ease. The medical assessment already scheduled. I'll make sure the evaluating physician receives the symptom documentation you provided. The cognitive decline will be well established by the time the conservatorship hearing arrives. And if Harvey tries to contest, he won't have the opportunity. Once he's formally assessed as incompetent, his legal standing evaporates. The hearing on the 21st is just procedural confirmation. Bernard stopped the playback. Gerald, he said quietly. Last name? Kieran pulled up something on his phone. Gerald Whitmore. He's the administrator at Riverside Grove, the assisted living facility where Uncle Dennis was planning to have you placed. The people who promise to care for the elderly. The administrators who smile and nod during facility tours. They are not always heroes. Sometimes they are business partners in theft. Bernard's office door opened. Vivica Wolf entered without knocking, her face tight with urgency. We need to talk, she said. Now. She set a folder on Bernard's desk, still catching her breath. Monica Prescott's attorney, Richard Castellano, just filed for a continuance of the October 21st conservatorship hearing. Claims inadequate time to prepare counter-arguments to your motions. Translation, they know they're losing and they're stalling. What else? Bernard asked. Dennis has been making frantic calls to real estate contacts in Vermont. Multiple inquiries about property valuations, comparable sales data, appraisal verification. He's panicking about the Vermont property discrepancy being exposed. Viveka pulled out a document, public records property assessments, recent sales comparables. The estate filing lists the Vermont property at $340,000. But I ran the comps myself. Recent sales in that area, similar square footage, similar condition, market value, is approximately $520,000. That's a $180,000 undervaluation. She looked at me directly. Someone deliberately lowballed the appraisal to reduce the apparent estate value. Lower estate value means less legal scrutiny, easier approval for conservatorship, faster liquidation. It's textbook asset manipulation, fraud. Bernard rewound Kieran's recording, found the timestamp he wanted. Monica's voice filled the room again. Gerald made sure the low assessment went into the official filing. Bernard stopped playback. Gerald Whitmore, Riverside Grove administrator. He's not just facilitating the placement, he's actively participating in the fraud. Institutional complicity, Viveka said. This elevates the criminal charges significantly. We're not just prosecuting family members anymore. We're going after a licensed care facility and its administrative leadership. I thought about all the families who'd trusted Riverside Grove. All the elderly residents who'd been placed there believing they'd be protected. How many others had Gerald Whitmore helped steal from? Bernard fast-forwarded to the end of Kieran's recording, listening with headphones. Then he froze, his expression darkening. He rewound 15 seconds and played it aloud. Gerald Whitmore's voice clear and confident. I'll make sure the October medical assessment supports your timeline. October 14th, 6 days from now. The competency evaluation that would strip me of all legal rights. It had been rigged from the beginning. Knowing the assessment was rigged gave us 6 days to dismantle Gerald Whitmore's institutional conspiracy. But Glenn Garrison had other plans for Saturday night plans he didn't share with anyone until the evidence was already secured. I wouldn't learn any of this until Sunday morning, when Glenn arrived at Bernard's office carrying an encrypted drive and a written tactical report. But I'm going to tell it the way he described it to me, because some things deserve to be seen clearly. At 11:47 p.m., Glenn positioned himself in the oak tree on the neighbor's lot outside Celeste's home, infrared equipment already recording. He'd never mentioned it to any of us. But during our initial visit to Dwight's house, he'd cataloged something the rest of us missed. Celeste's eyes kept flicking toward the basement door, the subtle calculation of someone mentally rehearsing what needed to disappear if the investigation got too close. You learn something in combat that civilians never grasp. The guilty always return to the crime scene not out of remorse, but out of panic. So Glenn returned, and he waited. At 11:52 p.m., the rear door opened. Celeste emerged in dark clothing, carrying a red lens tactical flashlight, moving directly toward the basement's exterior vent access. Glenn activated his voice recorder and whispered, "Target exiting rear door, carrying industrial flashlight, moving toward basement vent access, wearing surgical gloves." The infrared footage captured everything. Celeste kneeling at the vent cover, removing screws, reaching into the ductwork with gloved hands, carefully dismantling the chemical delivery lines, the same equipment that had been poisoning me for 8 months. She worked with the calm precision of someone executing a rehearsed plan, no hesitation, no guilt, just methodical destruction. Glenn's whispered commentary continued. Gloves won't matter. Infrared sees bone structure, gait pattern. She just signed her confession. At one point, Celeste paused and muttered something barely audible. Should have done this weeks ago. 14 minutes, 4 camera angles. By 12:14 a.m., the equipment was sealed in black contractor bags, and she was back inside. When we watched the footage together, Sunday morning, Vivica's expression hardened with each frame. "This is obstruction of justice," she said. Ohio Revised Code 2921.12. Separate felony charge, non-probationable, no plea bargain option. Bernard added quietly. "We have evidence of the crime. Now we have evidence of the cover-up. 2 separate prosecutions." Then Glenn advanced to a specific timestamp, minute 11:43 seconds. Behind the basement window, a second thermal signature, male, taller than Celeste, holding what looked like a shop vacuum. Dennis, my other son, helping his sister-in-law destroy evidence that could implicate his brother. 43 seconds that constituted documented participation in obstruction of justice. How many family dinners had they shared? Passing bread and conspiracy in equal measure, never imagining a night vision lens would turn their midnight cleanup into a felony. Then Vivica froze. Wait, her finger hovered over the pause button. Behind the furnace, third thermal signature. She rewound, played it again in slow motion. There a smaller profile moving briefly before disappearing into darkness. Too small for an adult. A shape consistent with a child or teenager. Vivica began adjusting the contrast pixel by pixel, bringing that small shadow into sharper focus. I stared at the screen and felt something cold settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the evidence and everything to do with what finding it might mean. The conspiracy had already taken my sons, my daughters-in-law, a physician, a facility administrator. I had believed it stopped there. Vivica's enhancement software kept working the shadow sharpening, slowly toward a face I was afraid to recognize. The enhanced image resolved slowly, pixel by pixel, until the shape became unmistakable. The third shadow wasn't a younger child. It was Kieran, 14 years old. He told us later he'd slipped back into the house that night to retrieve his phone charger, saw the basement light on, and stopped at the top of the stairs when he heard voices. He watched from the doorway as his aunt and uncle dismantled everything, not moving, not breathing, not fully understanding what he was seeing, only knowing it was wrong. The conspiracy hadn't infected him. It had terrified him into silence. But while we were processing that revelation, my son Dwight was making a choice of his own. Bernard had received the call at dawn, Dwight's voice barely controlled. "I need to meet with you, alone, before anyone else gets arrested." By 10:35 a.m. Sunday, they sat across from each other in a nearly empty diner, downtown corner booth, far from anyone who might recognize my son. Dwight's eyes were red. His hands shook as he slid a small encrypted flash drive across the table. Everything she did, he said without preamble. Emails, chemical supplier invoices from Indiana, forged medical authorization documents. It's all there. Bernard didn't touch the drive. Why now? Just tell me one thing first. Dwight's voice broke. Is my dad safe? Is his head clear? He's safe, Bernard said carefully. Cognitively intact. The toxicology is clearing. Dwight's shoulders dropped relief and guilt, arriving simultaneously indistinguishable from each other. The Kentucky cases are on there too, he said quietly. 2 previous victims. 2019 and 2021. Same methodology both times. I didn't know when we got married, but 6 months ago I found encrypted files on her laptop. Documentation, proof of concept, like a resume. He looked up. She made my father victim number 3. What does it cost a son to betray his wife to save his father? More than you'd think. Less than staying silent. Bernard asked when Dwight had known. Early September came the answer. He'd seen the equipment orders put it together and said nothing, terrified of losing her, terrified of what the truth would do to his children, terrified of being the one who destroyed everything. The excuse hung unfinished in the air between them, and neither man tried to complete it. That afternoon, we played Kieran's recording in full at Bernard's office, Viveka present as official witness. The first 18 minutes were devastating. Celeste's voice discussing asset liquidation, timelines, and conservatorship strategy, with Dennis cold and methodical as accountants reviewing quarterly figures. Then Celeste left the room. Footsteps, a door closing, silence. Then Dwight's voice alone, unguarded, whispering into the emptiness of a room he thought was empty. If he ever finds out what I knew, he'll never forgive me. I know it. God help me, I know it. I reached for the pause button without thinking. Bernard rewound it. We listened again, the same broken whisper. The same confession that no attorney had coached and no deal had purchased. 10 seconds later, a door opened. Monica's voice entered the recording, asking Dwight to sign property transfer documents for my Vermont estate before the conservatorship hearing. Dwight agreed. Monica mentioned Gerald Whitmore's name and the October 14th competency assessment deadline. Bernard cross-referenced the timestamp, September 28th, 2022, against Monica's sworn statement, which claimed she had never coordinated with Riverside Grove administration and had no knowledge of any facility-based conspiracy. That's perjury, Viveka said, and it connects all 3 branches: the chemical poisoning, the conservatorship fraud, and Whitmore's institutional facilitation, coordinated from the beginning. Monica's presence on that recording didn't just contradict her sworn statement. It dismantled her entire defense in 40 seconds of audio she never knew existed. Monica's presence at Riverside Grove on September 28th demolished her sworn statement in 48 hours. By Monday, October 10th, the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office had enough contradictions to file additional charges. The Hamilton County investigator shakes his head in disbelief as he slides the folder across the table toward Viveka, the handwriting on the legal strategy so meticulous it looks like a suicide note written in legalese. This was in Celeste's desk, the investigator says, dated October 3rd, 2 days before we executed the warrant. I leaned forward in my chair. The folder contains 37 pages of notes written in Celeste's precise paralegal script. At the top, defensive positioning, anticipated charges. Below that, a timeline matching every move we documented. The September dates, the Louisville victims, the toxicology markers. She'd mapped our entire investigation before we'd even formalized it. She knew, Viveka says quietly, she knew exactly what was coming, but it's the last page that stops my breath. A handwritten letter addressed to her children, not to Dwight. To the children she'd never had, the family she'd never started. The letter explains her choices, apologizes for the scandal, asks for understanding she knows won't come. It reads like a confession wrapped in justification, a woman who'd decided the only way out was through, and the only person who'd pay the price was herself. She was preparing to take the fall, I say. All of it. Dwight walks, Dennis walks, she carries everything. The investigator taps another section. Look at the financial analysis. She'd calculated how to structure a plea that maximizes restitution to you while minimizing exposure for the others. It's a legal blueprint for self-destruction. Have you ever watched someone try to save people who don't deserve saving? It's the most heartbreaking form of loyalty I've ever seen. 2 hours later, I'm sitting in Hamilton County Probate Court Courtroom 4B. Judge Adrienne Holbrook presides, 62 years old, former prosecutor, a woman whose reputation for fairness is matched only by her intolerance for manipulation. Bernard sits to my left. Viveka and the prosecution team occupy the front row. Across the aisle, Celeste sits beside her attorney, Samuel Prentice. Dennis and Monica have separate counsel. Dwight sits alone at the far end, no attorney beside him. Prentice stands for the preliminary hearing. Your Honor, given the complexity of the allegations and the potential harm to minor children, we propose a settlement framework. My client is prepared to accept full restitution responsibility in exchange for reduced charges and dismissal of conspiracy claims against Dennis Prescott and Monica Prescott. Judge Holbrook looks up from the file. And the defendant Dwight Prescott, My client's proposal includes a recommendation that Mr. Dwight Prescott be considered separately given mitigating evidence of duress and limited involvement. It's a masterpiece of legal maneuvering. Celeste absorbs the criminal exposure. The estate gets repaid. The family fragments quietly. Kieran and Ren never hear their father testify against their mother. Everyone walks away wounded, but intact. Except me. I stand before I realize I'm moving. Bernard's hand touches my arm, but I'm already speaking. Your Honor, I'm Harvey Prescott. I'd like to address the court. Judge Holbrook studies me for 3 seconds. Mr. Prescott, this is a preliminary hearing. Victim statements are typically reserved for sentencing. I understand, Your Honor, but this proposal treats my attempted murder as a financial dispute. I'm asking the court to reject any settlement that doesn't hold all conspirators equally accountable. The judge's expression doesn't change. The court will take your objection into consideration. However, prosecutorial discretion. They coordinated, I interrupt, and I know I'm crossing a line, but I can't stop. I have recordings. Kieran's recording from September 28th places Monica at the facility coordinating document fraud with Dwight. The Louisville investigation proves Celeste's pattern. This wasn't a single crime. It was a coordinated attempt to kill me and steal everything I built over 40 years. A settlement lets them pretend it was something less. Did they really think I'd accept money in exchange for justice? The courtroom is silent. Judge Holbrook looks at the prosecution table. The lead prosecutor stands. Your Honor, the state shares Mr. Prescott's concerns. We oppose the settlement framework. Prentice starts to respond, but movement stops him. Dwight stands at the defense table, and his voice cuts through the room like a wire pulled too tight. I'd like to offer testimony, he says, without immunity, against Celeste Prescott and Dennis Prescott. The courtroom erupts. Celeste lunges from her seat, and 2 bailiffs move immediately to restrain her. She's screaming, "No, you don't understand what they'll do to you." And the sound is raw and desperate and completely human. For the first time since this started, I see her as something other than a threat. I see her as someone who tried to save a man who couldn't be saved using methods that destroyed them both. Judge Holbrook's gavel comes down 3 times sharp cracks that silence the room. Ms. Prescott, you will sit down or you will be removed. Mr. Prentice, control your client. Celeste collapses back into her chair, and the sound she makes is somewhere between a sob and a gasp. Dwight stands perfectly still, his hands at his sides, looking at no one. Judge Holbrook's voice drops to a temperature that could freeze salt water. Mr. Dwight Prescott, you are represented by counsel. Dwight says. I dismissed him this morning. Then I'm appointing standby counsel and postponing this hearing for 72 hours to ensure you understand the implications of testifying without immunity. This court does not accept proffer agreements made under emotional duress. She looks at Prentice and her expression could cut glass. Counselor, if you bring another settlement proposal that treats conspiracy to commit murder as a bargaining chip, I will hold you in contempt. If you attempt to use minor children as leverage in any future motion, I will refer you to the bar for sanctions. Never bring hostage negotiation into my courtroom again. The gavel comes down one final time, and the hearing is over. The 72 hours gave everyone time to calculate what truth would cost. On Tuesday morning, October 11th, I sat in a different courtroom, watching a different kind of witness take the oath. Bernice Stafford raises her right hand in the prosecutor's deposition room, her retired ICU nurse composure, suggesting she has testified before and knows exactly how much truth costs. She's my neighbor 2 doors down from Dwight and Celeste. 64 years old, 28 years in critical care at Good Samaritan Hospital. The kind of woman who notices everything and forgets nothing. Viveka Wolf sits across from her with a legal pad and a recorder. Bernard and I occupy chairs against the back wall observers to our own case. Ms. Stafford, Viveka begins. You contacted our office on October 6th regarding observations you made in late August and early September. Can you describe what prompted that call? Bernice's hands rest flat on the table, steady as surgical instruments. My mother was financially exploited by a caregiver in 2018. Lost nearly everything before we caught it. Since then, I pay attention to certain patterns in my neighborhood. Elder abuse has warning signs if you know what to look for. And you observed such signs? I observed Dwight Prescott asking me specific medical questions in late August. He approached me while I was gardening, asked which sleep medications would be hardest to detect in blood work for someone over 70. Specific question and specific age range. The air in the deposition room changes temperature. Viveka writes something down her pen, moving with careful precision. Did you find that question unusual? I found it alarming, Bernice says. I'm retired, not practicing. There's no innocent reason a man asks his neighbor that particular question about that particular age group when his father is 68. Viveka flips a page. You also documented other observations. Yes, I keep a journal now. After what happened to my mother, I document anything that raises flags. On August 17th and 18th, I observed Dwight loading heavy industrial drums into his garage at 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 nights in a row. I was up with insomnia and saw him from my bedroom window. When I asked him about it the next day, he said it was construction debris removal. Was there active construction in your neighborhood? No, we're a residential cul-de-sac. No permits, no projects. And construction debris doesn't require 2 a.m. disposal on consecutive nights. Bernice produces a small leather journal from her purse. Inside are dated entries written in the same steady hand, timestamps and observations recorded with clinical precision. August 17th, 2:14, AMD. Prescott, 2 cylindrical drums, approximately 55-gallon capacity. August 18th, 2:09, AM. Same activity, 3 drums this time. She'd been documenting my son's preparation for murder with the same care she'd once charted vitals in the ICU. There's a particular cruelty in watching strangers reconstruct your son's premeditated betrayal with time stamps and clinical precision while you sit 10 feet away pretending to breathe normally. Viveka accepts the journal into evidence. Thank you, Ms. Stafford. Your vigilance may have saved Mr. Prescott's life. Bernice looks directly at me for the first time. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I thought I might be overreacting. I nod because I can't speak. The preliminary hearing convened in Hamilton County Criminal Court on Wednesday, October 12th. An expedited proceeding granted given the active threat to an elderly victim and the volume of physical evidence already in state custody. Full trial proceedings would follow in the months ahead, but today the court would hear initial evidence and consider the defendant's intent to enter guilty pleas. Judge Raymond Keller presides, 59 years old, former federal prosecutor, a man whose methodical approach to allocution and plea agreements has earned him a reputation for fairness without mercy. The courtroom is smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and austere, the kind of space designed to strip away performance and leave only fact. The state presents its case with surgical efficiency, physical rigging evidence from the basement, chemical forensics on the carbon monoxide apparatus, my blood panel analysis showing sedative compounds, Glenn Garrison's surveillance footage establishing the conspiracy timeline. Each piece builds on the last, a prosecution constructed like quality wiring, every connection, solid, every element load-bearing. Then the state calls Dr. Graham Mercer. My physician for 12 years takes the stand at 2:45 p.m., and I watch the defense table stiffen. The prosecutor projects 2 documents side by side on the courtroom screen. On the left, my actual clinical records from Dr. Mercer's practice. On the right, the symptom logs Dennis and Monica submitted to justify the conservatorship petition. Dr. Mercer? The prosecutor says, "Are you familiar with the document on the right?" I am now. I'd never seen it before the investigation. These 7 entries claim I documented progressive dementia symptoms in Harvey Prescott between August and September 2022. I never wrote them. These are not my observations, not my handwriting, not my signatures. The prosecutor points to specific lines highlighted in yellow. Can you identify the fraud points? Dr. Mercer counts them methodically. Invented cognitive decline symptoms, backdated medical observations, falsified physician signatures, claims of consultations that never occurred, medication recommendations I never made, memory test results from assessments I never administered, and a diagnosis of progressive dementia that contradicts his actual cognitive evaluation. When did you last assess Mr. Prescott's cognitive function? August 3rd, 2022. Full cognitive assessment across all domains. Normal function. Non-spamporskis door. The prosecutor lets that sit for 3 seconds. Doctor, in your professional opinion, was Harvey Prescott cognitively impaired in September 2022? Absolutely not. Someone fabricated a medical crisis that never existed. 4 minutes of testimony. That's how long it takes to collapse an entire defense foundation built on falsified medical records. I watch Dennis and Monica's attorney lean back in his chair, and I know he's calculating settlement options before the jury even deliberates. Then Dwight stands in the gallery. Your Honor, he says, and his voice carries the same quiet precision it had when he was 16 and told me he wanted to study engineering. I wish to formally allocute and provide testimony against all co-conspirators without any plea agreement. Judge Keller looks up from his notes. Mr. Prescott, you understand allocution without agreement exposes you to maximum sentencing. I understand, Your Honor. I stared at the back of Dwight's neck as he stood to confess the exact spot I used to kiss when he was a baby and wondered which version of my son was real. Before the judge can respond, Celeste screams from the defense table. Not a word, a sound, raw and animal and desperate. Then words tumble out in a cascade. He doesn't know what he's confessing to. The carbon monoxide plan was only phase 1. If he testifies without immunity, he'll implicate himself in the Kentucky murders too. The courtroom freezes. The word murders plural enters the official record for the first time. 2 men stand up in the gallery wearing Kentucky State Police badges, and I realize they've been sitting behind me the entire trial. Judge Keller calls a 20-minute recess. The Kentucky detectives confer with the prosecution team in the hallway, while Celesta sits at the defense table with her head in her hands. Dwight remains standing in the gallery, perfectly still, looking at nothing. When we reconvene, his defense attorney stands before the judge, speaks. Dwight's defense attorney stands after the recess and announces to Judge Keller that he is severing representation effective immediately due to irreconcilable conflict with his client's intended testimony. Your Honor, the attorney says, Mr. Dwight Prescott has informed me he intends to provide allocution that contradicts my legal advice and potentially waives critical constitutional protections. I cannot in good conscience continue representation under these circumstances. Judge Keller looks at Dwight. Mr. Prescott, do you understand what your attorney is saying? I do, Your Honor. Do you wish to retain new counsel or proceed with court-appointed standby representation? Neither, Your Honor. I wish to address the court directly. The judge pauses, studying my son with the careful attention of a man who has seen every variety of courtroom performance and knows when something authentic is happening. Very well. You may proceed, but I'm appointing standby counsel regardless. You have the floor. Dwight turns and looks directly at me for the first time since the trial began. His eyes are the same color as his mother's, were hazel with flecks of gold that caught the light when she laughed. I haven't thought about that in years. Your Honor. Dwight says, still looking at me, I designed every detail, the carbon monoxide apparatus, the sedation schedule, the timing that coincided with Dennis's conservatorship petition. My wife followed my instructions because I manipulated her fear of losing our children's inheritance. I told her we'd lose everything if we didn't act. The plan was mine alone. Judge Keller leans forward. Mr. Prescott, you understand by confessing without representation, you are waiving substantial constitutional protections. I understand. My father is sitting 12 feet away. I need him to know the truth before I'm sentenced. This was my choice, my crime, my consequence. He reaches into his jacket and produces a small flash drive which the bailiff collects and brings to the judge. This contains a full confession I recorded on October 9th, 3 days ago. It details my planning process, my manipulation of Celeste, and my exclusive responsibility for every element of the conspiracy. The courtroom technology officer loads the drive. The video plays on the screen. Dwight sitting in what looks like a hotel room, speaking directly to the camera with the same calm precision he used to explain electrical theory when he was studying engineering. He describes researching carbon monoxide delivery methods. He claims he threatened to leave Celeste and take their children if she didn't help him execute the plan. He provides specific dates and details that contradict elements of Celeste's known involvement, creating gaps in the timeline where her participation seems optional rather than integral. I watch Bernard lean over and whisper something to the prosecutor. The video is too perfect, too comprehensive, too carefully designed to create reasonable doubt about Celeste's intent while establishing Dwight's sole culpability. It's a legal strategy wrapped in a confession, the same protective framework Celeste built for him now inverted. You're watching this, thinking one of them is lying to save the other. But what if they're both telling the truth about their own guilt and lying about their spouse's innocence? The video ends. Dwight faces Judge Keller again. I enter a guilty plea to all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse. I waive my right to trial and request immediate sentencing. Mr. Prescott, the court cannot accept an immediate guilty plea without proper allocution proceedings and mental competency evaluation. What you're describing suggests either severe coercion of your spouse or a coordinated attempt to manipulate this court's proceedings. Your Honor, I'm simply telling the truth. I'm 41 years old. I'm a mechanical engineer. I understood exactly what I was doing when I built that apparatus and exactly what would happen when I activated it. My wife is a victim of my manipulation, not a co-conspirator. Celeste's attorney stands. Your Honor, my client vehemently disputes this characterization and maintains her previous, but Celeste is already standing, and the sound that comes from her is somewhere between rage and anguish. No, I won't let you do this. Dwight turns to her. Celeste, please sit down. I researched the Kentucky cases, she shouts, and the courtroom goes absolutely silent. I knew the carbon monoxide delivery methods from my paralegal work on medical malpractice cases. You're trying to protect me the same way I tried to protect you, but I won't accept it. Judge Keller's gavel comes down hard. Ms. Prescott, you will sit down and consult with your attorney, or I will hold you in contempt. Celeste ignores him, her focus locked on Dwight. You didn't manipulate me. I chose this. I knew what we were doing, and I knew it was wrong, and I chose it anyway, because I thought we could finally be free of debt and fear and fighting about money every single night. Celeste, I won't let you take this alone. The judge's voice drops to permafrost temperature. Bailiff place both defendants in separate contempt, holds until they can address this court without conflicting confessions. Prosecution. I need a position statement on whether the state can accept either guilty plea given this clear mutual protection dynamic. Two bailiffs approach Dwight. He doesn't resist as they guide his hands behind his back. The handcuffs click shut on my son's wrists, and all I could hear was the tape recording echoing in my memory. He'll never forgive me. I know it. As they're led towards separate holding cells, Bernard's phone vibrates. He glances at the screen, reads something, and his expression shifts. He leans close to my ear. Viveka says Kentucky obtained warrants for the Cincinnati house and Dwight's financial records. They're executing the search now. The prosecutor approaches Judge Keller's bench. Their conversation is brief and quiet, but I can read the prosecutor's body language well enough. When he turns back to address the court, I already know what's coming. Your Honor, given the emerging multi-state investigation and the conflicting allocutions from both defendants, the state of Ohio formally withdraws acceptance of Mr. Dwight Prescott's guilty plea. We request a continuance pending coordination with Kentucky law enforcement regarding the scope of potential serial offenses. Judge Keller looks at the empty defense tables where my son and daughter-in-law sat minutes ago. Continuance granted, this court stands in recess pending further investigation. The gavel comes down, and I realize the question isn't whether they tried to kill me. The question is whether they've done it before. The Kentucky warrants yielded financial records correspondence research on carbon monoxide toxicity. By Thursday morning, the scope allowed Judge Keller to proceed with Ohio's sentencing, while Kentucky built its case. Harvey adjusts the podium microphone in Hamilton County Criminal Court, preparing to deliver his victim impact statement, while Dwight and Celeste sit shackled at separate defense tables, 12 feet apart. Kieran sits in the gallery beside Glenn Garrison. My grandson wears a borrowed suit jacket that's slightly too large. Glenn's hand rests on the bench behind him, not touching just present. Judge Keller nods. Mr. Prescott, you may proceed. I set aside Bernard's prepared statement. Your Honor, I spent 40 years as an electrician. I understand load-bearing structures and points of failure. My sons plotted to kill me for money. I earned wiring houses in weather that would make your hands bleed. They calculated my life expectancy against their debt and decided I was worth more dead. Dwight's head drops. Celeste stares straight ahead. I don't want maximum punishment. I want enough time that my son has to eventually look his own children in the eye and explain why their grandfather spent his final decade alone. I want him to serve long enough that Kieran and Ren are old enough to understand what happened and ask their own questions. Kieran is crying silently. Your Honor, I'm requesting the court recognize what my grandson Kieran did. He's 14. He risked everything to record evidence that saved my life. Today I'm formally designating Bernard Harrington as my interim healthcare proxy and financial power of attorney effective immediately. I've included written instructions that, upon Kieran Prescott's 18th birthday, he shall be offered full primary authority through a new legal instrument executed at that time. I'm excluding both my sons, Dennis and Dwight, from any future role in my care or estate decisions permanently. Bernard stands. Your Honor, we filed the supporting documents this morning. Judge Keller reviews the paperwork and nods. So noted, the court commends young Mr. Kieran Prescott for his courage and moral clarity. Glenn's hand moves to Kieran's shoulder, now steady and firm. Judge Keller delivers the sentences with methodical precision. Mr. Dwight Prescott, you are sentenced to 6 years in the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. Ms. Celeste Prescott, 2.5 years. Both defendants are permanently prohibited from holding financial power of attorney for any person over the age of 65. The estate valued at $520,000 is restored to Harvey Prescott with immediate effect. Emergency temporary custody of minor grandchildren is granted to Harvey Prescott, pending family services review. The gavel comes down. Dwight turns to look at me, his expression impossible to read. Celeste doesn't turn. Justice isn't always about maximum punishment. Sometimes it's about giving someone enough time to understand what they destroyed, and enough years left afterward to live with it. Kieran whispers as we leave. You gave him mercy he didn't deserve. That takes more strength than revenge. That afternoon, Bernard and I video called Dorothy Brennan from his Cincinnati office. She appears on screen in a small apartment afternoon light, through lace curtains behind her. Mrs. Brennan, I say thank you for taking this call. Mr. Prescott, I needed to hear it from you directly. Celeste received 2.5 years. Dwight got 6. They're both prohibited from ever holding power of attorney for vulnerable adults again. Dorothy closes her eyes. When she opens them, they're wet. My money's gone forever. I signed that NDA, but I needed to know someone stopped her this time. Thank you for standing when I couldn't. Bernard leans forward. Mrs. Brennan, the Ohio criminal convictions give us grounds to void your NDA on public policy grounds. A settlement that silences victims of criminal conduct is voidable when that conduct results in conviction. We filed a new civil action in Louisville this morning. Dorothy's hand goes to her mouth. You can do that. The precedent is strong in Kentucky. I speak before thinking it through. Mrs. Brennan, Whatever the litigation costs, I'm covering it. You won't pay $1. Mr. Prescott, I can't. You're not asking. I'm offering. They did to you what they tried to do to me. The only difference is I had a grandson brave enough to record them. Bernard pulls up a document. There's more. Glenn traveled to Louisville and located 2 additional victims from 2019 who signed similar NDAs after suspicious financial losses involving Celeste. Same pattern, elderly widows, substantial assets, sudden cognitive decline, claim settlements with silence provisions. We've named all 3 victims in a consolidated civil action seeking to establish Celeste as a serial financial predator. Dorothy's voice is barely a whisper. 3 of us. At that we've found so far, Berner says. The consolidated filing supports enhanced fraud charges in Kentucky. Celeste's sentence could be extended significantly. How many elderly victims had signed silence agreements believing they were alone, never knowing a pattern connected them all? Dorothy wipes her eyes. When do we start? Bernard taps the Kentucky filing on his screen. Tomorrow morning. The call ends. Bernard's phone chimes. He reads it and his expression shifts. Hey, Harvey, you need to see this. He turns the phone toward me. Emergency filing notification. Monica Prescott's attorney has filed a motion to dismiss the conservatorship petition, entirely citing my courtroom vindication. An affidavit is attached. Bernard scrolls and reads aloud. Monica Prescott states under penalty of perjury that she was coerced by Dennis Prescott into participating in the conservatorship conspiracy and offers to provide testimony against Dennis Prescott in exchange for immunity from prosecution. She's turning on him. The partnership just fractured, Bernard says. When Monica testifies, she'll have to explain Gerald Whitmore's role at Riverside Grove. The whole institutional conspiracy comes apart. My phone vibrates. A text from Glenn. Dennis just tried to withdraw $50,000 from joint account. Bank flagged it. He knows Monica flipped. Bernard is already dialing. We need to notify the prosecutor before Dennis runs. Dennis was arrested at the Cincinnati airport trying to board a flight to Costa Rica. Monica's testimony detailed every forged document, every falsified medical assessment, every dollar Gerald Whitmore helped redirect through Riverside Grove's accounting systems. By mid-November, both Dennis and Gerald faced federal charges. The conservatorship petition was dismissed with prejudice. The glass partition at Warren Correctional Institution in Lebanon, Ohio, separates me from my son by 3 inches, and 6 years black intercom phones resting in their cradles. While we stare at each other, across a silence neither of us knows how to break. It's the week before Christmas 2022. I didn't tell anyone I was driving here. Kieran asked where I was going, and I said, errands. He nodded like he understood, which maybe he did. Dwight is thinner, his hair is prison-shorn, and there's a scar above his left eyebrow I don't recognize. He's wearing state-issued blues that hang loose on a frame that used to carry muscle from weekend construction projects. 30 seconds pass. Then, we both reach for the intercom receivers at the same moment. Dad. Dwight. Another silence. He clears his throat. Are the kids eating well? Kieran said you moved closer to them. They're eating. Kieran cooks better than I do. Ren likes macaroni 3 times a week. That sounds right. I watch his hand tighten on the receiver. His wedding ring is gone. I don't know if they took it or if he removed it himself. I haven't told them everything, I say. They know you and Celeste made serious financial mistakes. They know you need time apart to think about your choices. They don't know about the carbon monoxide. They don't know you tried to kill me. Dwight's eyes close. When he opens them, they're wet. Thank you? I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for them. They'll learn the details eventually. Court records are public, but they'll learn when they're old enough to process it, not when they're 14 and 9. I understand. He presses his forehead against the glass partition. His breath fogs the surface in small clouds. I am so sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. I look at my son through 3 inches of reinforced glass and 6 years of consequences, and I realize there are no words that change what happened. No apology large enough to fill the space where trust used to live. No explanation that makes attempted murder into something understandable. I know, I say. That's all. Not forgiveness, not understanding. Just acknowledgement of an irreversible reality. We sit in silence for another 3 minutes. Then a guard taps Dwight's shoulder. Visiting time is over. He stands and I stand, and we look at each other one more time before he's led back through the steel door that locks from the outside. I drive home in darkness and I don't cry. On January 1st, 2023, I wake at 6:30 a.m. in my new Cincinnati apartment. The bedroom is smaller than the house I sold, but the mortgage is paid off and the windows face east. Morning light comes through plain white curtains I bought at a department store without thinking about whether Constance would have chosen them. I brew coffee in a plain white mug. Constance's heirloom china, cup the one with the blue cornflowers her grandmother brought from Poland, is in a storage unit somewhere. I don't remember packing it. I don't miss it this morning. No headache. First time since February. 300 days. I stand in the kitchen holding the coffee and listening to the apartment building's morning sounds. Someone's shower running 2 floors up, a car starting in the parking lot, the refrigerator's steady hum, ordinary sounds, safe sounds, sounds that don't include my son's footsteps in the basement at 2 a.m. If someone you love is showing you who they are through small cruelties and convenient forgetfulness, believe them the first time, not the 8th month later when the carbon monoxide detector starts beeping. I review the day's tasks, grocery shopping, laundry, fix the loose handle on Ren's bedroom door, call Bernard about the Kentucky recovery case Dorothy Brennan's NDA has been voided, and 2 of the 3 victims have already received partial settlements. Constance's photograph sits on the hallway table in a simple frame. I pass it twice before I realize I haven't spoken to her picture this morning. For 2 years after she died, I narrated everything to that photograph. What I ate for breakfast, what the weather looked like, what the grandkids said during Sunday calls. Speaking to her absence was how I survived the silence. This morning, I look at the photograph and feel nothing sharp. Just a dull ache that's been there so long, it's become part of my baseline. I don't need to tell her about the coffee or the loose door handle or the fact that my son is in prison for trying to kill me. I don't need to tell her everything anymore. That means I'm healing. Footsteps in the hallway, small ones. Ren appears in the kitchen doorway wearing pajamas with dinosaurs on them, her hair a sleep-tangled mess. Grandpa Harvey, can we make pancakes today? It's New Year's Day, sweetheart. We can make whatever you want. She climbs onto one of the kitchen chairs, feet swinging above the floor. Kieran says you used to make pancakes for Dad when he was little. I set down the coffee mug. The truth about what terrified me most isn't complicated. It wasn't the carbon monoxide apparatus built with mechanical precision in my own basement. It wasn't the forged conservatorship documents or my son's practice signature on fraudulent transfer papers. It wasn't even the sedatives dissolved in drinks served by hands I'd held when they were small enough to wrap around 2 of my fingers. The horror was realizing I'd spent 8 months ignoring every warning sign because admitting the truth about a person you love more than life itself is the most agonizing thing a father will ever do. Willful blindness isn't stupidity. It's love refusing to believe the person you created could want you erased. But the other truth, the one I'm building now, is that love doesn't end when trust shatters. It just changes shape. Bernard helped me establish a trust fund using the recovered estate. $520,000 set aside for Kieran and Ren's education therapy and future stability. Even if I never forgive Dwight, I won't let his children inherit financial chaos alongside their parents' crimes. The cycle breaks here. I turned toward the kitchen, where a 7-year-old waited for pancakes, and for the first time in a year, I felt something that wasn't rage or grief. I felt hungry. Yes, sweetheart, I say. Today we make pancakes. And to you listening to my story, remember this. The people who know you best also know exactly how to hurt you worst. I spent 8 months ignoring warning signs because I couldn't imagine my own sons wanting me dead. Don't make my mistake. If someone you love starts asking strange questions if pills appear, you don't remember if your health declines when they're around, but improves when they're not. Pay attention. Family betrayal doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It comes disguised as concern, wrapped in familiarity, delivered by hands you've held since they were small. The hardest lesson wasn't about carbon monoxide or forged documents. It was about willful blindness. Love doesn't mean trusting without verification. Being a good father doesn't require letting your children destroy you. I believe God allowed me to survive, not just to expose the conspiracy, but to break a cycle. My grandchildren won't inherit the blind trust that nearly killed me. They'll learn that real love includes boundaries, that family doesn't excuse cruelty, and that family betrayal often comes from those who know our vulnerabilities best because we gave them that knowledge freely. If this story affected you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment telling me, have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? Your experience might help someone else recognize the warning signs. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Revenge Dad. Every story I share carries a lesson someone needs. Thank you for staying until the very end. I know this wasn't an easy story to hear. Please remember, some details have been adapted for storytelling and to protect privacy, but the core truth about recognizing and surviving family betrayal remains real and urgent.